Here we go. Hello and welcome. How's everybody going tonight? I am yet again running a little bit behind with a couple of tech problems on my side. My bot stopped working, so I gotta go ahead and see about getting that fixed. But besides that, so tonight I'm going to be doing bedtime stories. I'm going to be reading a variety of different stuff. I'm trying to make Thursdays like a regular kind of reading stream. So I'm just going to be reading bedtime stories while everybody else kind of just chills, gets in that groove, and just kind of kicks back and relax. We'll see. My voice has been acting kind of goofy today, but we'll see what happens. Let me get this tweet set out real quick here. Alright, so anyway, the tweet is sent, and what I'm going to go ahead and do is let's pick a couple of, well, as soon as... Alright, there you go. Browser really just wants to drag today. Although that's not that surprising, I guess. Anyway. So, hello and welcome. I am Kuriseru. If you're not familiar, if you're new here or anything like that, I do a lot of comfy chill streams. Oh, and also, I almost forgot. Welcome to the chill zone. We like to kick back, relax, and just kind of vibe here. Just nice, relaxing, chill place. Great place to lurk, to hang out, just kind of unwind after a busy, eventful day. This is not your typical high energy type channel or whatever else. I just like to kind of kick back and be laid back and just, I either play comfy games, do some reading ASMR, maybe some other like different sound checks, that kind of stuff. But again, we keep it real chill here. Except for my squeaky ass chair, but you know. The chair has no chill. So anyway, so tonight, like I said, I'm going to be reading a bunch of previews from a variety of different light novels. I was on an isekai kick last week. Today I think I'm probably going to switch it up a little bit. Let me go ahead and like darken the lights a little bit here. Kind of get a little bit more comfortable. Linguini McQueenie, that's an awesome name. And thanks for the follow, much appreciated. Welcome, welcome. Cheesy Linguini McQueenie, that is awesome. So by all means, feel free to kind of kick back, relax. We're all chill here. I'm going to be reading some stuff from like the previews and like, you know, the opening chapters or whatever else from, like I said, a variety of different light novels. Just kind of different things. We'll see how this kind of goes. Also, I do take voice line redeems from chat and stuff like that, so if there's like different passages you guys want to hear me read or whatever else, feel free to drop them on me. I'm pretty open to just going ahead and reading. Well, okay. Here, we have to be like, you know, obviously TOS friendly on Twitch and stuff. Maybe someplace else we can be like, we can cut loose a little bit more, but, you know, here on Twitch, we gotta kind of keep things relatively tame. So, but that aside, all bets are off. We can go ahead and roll with anything. So let me see here. What is going to be my first... What's the first thing I'm going to read for tonight? I am... Alrighty here. So let's see. I'm looking at this and... Sorry, everything's kind of running a little slow today. I don't think that I read this yet. The Ideal Sponger's Life. I mean on stream specifically. It's I think it's a pretty interesting series. Let me see if I can pull up at least the first section here. And you know what? I'm behind. I don't think I've actually read. Yeah, no, I haven't read chapter or volume 12 yet. It's interesting. Let me go ahead and see if I've actually got this local. Let me pull up that ebook real quick. Give me one quick sec here. That might be a little bit easier. Assuming I can find it. go. Alright, so let me go ahead and pull this up. Oh yeah, that's right, there was a few other things I was also going to go ahead and read tonight. Waiting for my potato to do stuff. So, here we go. I said, here we go. Damn it. I mean, you would think I've got a ton of stuff open, but really what it is, OBS just... Holy crap-tastic. Okay, you know what, let me just do this real quick. Since I've got this open... Alright. Let me go back to page 1. Alright. There we go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put up the cover image. Alrighty, here we go. So, this is The Ideal Sponger Life, Volume 1. And let me hydrate real quick and I'm going to just jump right into it. Okay. Prologue. In another world, for his first weekend off in 6 months. Welcome, my groom. Allow me to first offer my apologies for bringing you to my palace without any prior warning. I hope such an action can be forgiven, said a woman, smiling sweetly. She was absolutely striking, with red hair and tawny skin. What? The person she was addressing, a man by the name of Yamai Zenjiro, simply muttered a half-witted noise in response, completely unable to grasp the situation. What on earth's going on? Zenjiro thought to himself. The last he remembered, it was a Saturday, one that he was, for once, not spending at work. He had woken up at his usual time to make sure that he got the most out of his day off, such days being a rare occurrence since he'd started working. He had gotten on his bike and ridden to the nearby convenience store to grab some breakfast. That much he remembered. In fact, his backside is still atop the seat of his bike, and his hands were tightly gripping the handlebars. The basket on the front held a fried chicken meal that he'd heated up at the store, along with a half-liter bottle of chilled tea. Zenjiro wasn't sure if he was going crazy, so he reached out and checked the temperature of both items. The food was hot, and the drink was cold. The realistic sensations made him feel more certain that this was no dream. It also let him know, seeing as the food had not yet cooled down nor the tea warmed up, that he had not, in fact, lost consciousness and had instead been moved somewhere instantaneously. He'd been pedaling through Kanto in Japan until mere moments ago. How was he suddenly in some gloomy stone room, being smiled at by a beautiful woman? He observed the figure in front of him fixedly. She looked to be in her mid-20s, he thought, though she had a stronger bearing and appeared calmer than most of that age, so she might be a little bit older. At the very least, it seemed she was older than Zenjiro's own 24 years of age. She was wearing a sensuous red dress with a plunging neckline, opening up in a V down her chest, but her own form certainly didn't lose out to the eye-catching clothing. The valley of her breasts visible through that V boasted a chest more worthy of the moniker huge breasts than simply big ones, and her waist was as narrow as her chest was prominent. The lines of her body from the waist down were hidden by the flowing skirt of her gown, so he couldn't tell for sure, but her legs were probably just as attractive. She had wide, almost square shoulders that some men might not find to their liking, but Zenjiro was well aware of her more womanly charms. Hey sir, how you doing? Is it big lady time? Well, actually, it kinda is. I'm going through the first couple of chapters of Ideal Sponge Your Life. So yeah, absolutely. I have actually read, well, okay, I guess the question is, am I into this? Exactly what am I into? Are you talking about like the whole gigantism thing that that they're kind of hinting at on the image? Kinda, but I mean, she's not really a giantess, although she does have the protagonist in the palm of her hand, for the most part. So, the image is actually pretty fitting. I will say that yes, I have read all except like the last volume that's up, so. Yeah, it's pretty nice. By all means, feel free to hang out and chill and, have a listen. And of course, if you like the story, by all means, the book is currently being published by J Novel Club, so. And we had just come in, and Zenjiro had just appeared before this wonderful lady that we see on the cover. If he'd been certain that he was currently dreaming, he would have leaped forward and yelled, "Where have you been all my life?" That was how perfectly his type she was. Your Majesty, there's not much time. Now that the summoning has proven to be a success, it may be best to explain things as quickly as possible. A young man clad in leather armor suggested monotonously from the woman's side, while Zenjiro remained captivated by her beauty. It was that statement that first made Zenjiro realize that he and the woman weren't alone in the room. He hurriedly surveyed his surroundings and saw 4 men outfitted in the same way, armed with spears, surrounding him as he sat on a bike. There was also an elderly man wearing purple robes and leaning on a long staff. His failure to have noticed the others in the room wasn't because Zenjiro was unobservant. No, it was because the red-headed woman before him was just that imposing. Now that he looked at the armed men, he could see that they were well-built and not exactly bad-looking themselves, but when placed beside her, they were extras to the queen at best. More than anything, this might all be thanks to what was termed charisma, and as he considered that, the woman nodded slightly and looked him in the eye, addressing him. Very well. Now, my groom, I am sure you do not understand why you find yourself in a place like this. Would you permit me an explanation and an apology for these circumstances? What? Yeah. Zenjiro nodded, more at the force behind her smile than an understanding of her words. The woman's smile deepened at his meek reply. Good. In that case, a gloomy place such as this is ill-suited to a lengthy discussion. It would be best to change locales. I would like for you to follow me." With those words, the woman turned, sending her wavy red hair billowing around, and walked off. "We shall take care of your vehicle here," a guard said gruffly. "Ah, yeah, thanks." Still completely at a loss, he swung himself off the bike, automatically put the kickstand down out of habit, and locked it with the key from his pocket before hurrying after the stunning stranger, who was now standing at the entrance and watching him over her shoulder. Zenjiro was guided down a long corridor with stone walls and floors, into a large room with bright sunlight streaming in. There were 2 big leather sofas and a long wooden table between them, set up to allow for a comfortable discussion. Following her gesture, he sat on one sofa. Once she had seen him seated, she settled down on the couch opposite him and began to speak calmly. "Let us begin with the introductions. I am Ara Capua. I would like for you to call me Ara." Sure, Ara it is, ma'am. My name's Yamai Zenjiro. Yamai is my family name, and Zenjiro is my first name." "Then may I call you Sir Zenjiro?" "Yes, okay," he agreed, earning a smile from the woman, Ara. "Yes, Ara. Thanks, mommy." "My thanks, Sir Zenjiro. Now, I shall inform you of what has been done to you, explaining the chain of events simply. It may well be that this explanation displeases you, but it is not too late for the changes to be reversed. Should the circumstances not be to your liking, I swear on my honor that all shall be reverted to what it was. Therefore, would you listen in silence for the moment?" Her expression turned quite serious as she prefaced her explanation with that rather worrying assurance. Zenjiro had a bad feeling, but nodded in assent after a brief moment of thought. He had no idea what sort of situation he was in. Supposing he had the right to be angry like she said, he couldn't very well feel that way without understanding exactly what there was to be angry about. You could only put in a complaint after listening to everything your trade partner has to say, after all. "I understand. Please continue." Ara let out a sigh of relief at his answer before taking a deep breath and beginning her explanation. "My thanks. First, allow me to start with the fundamentals of where you are. This is the Kingdom of Capua, situated in the west of Randelion, also called the Southern Continent. This room itself is inside the Royal Palace, in the capital of that country. You may not know these names. That is only natural, as this is a different world from that in which you were raised. A parallel world, if you will." Huh? A parallel world? With a sideways glance at Zenjiro, talking in his utter incomprehension, Ara continued steadily. Her explanation continued for a good while. He didn't know how long they sat there for, but when he glanced at his watch about halfway through, it had been 7:30, and the hands had made their way around to 8 o'clock by the time they were finished. Zenjiro worked through everything he'd been told over the past hour or so, and summed it up dazedly. So, we're in a country called the Capua Kingdom, in a parallel world, and you're this country's queen, milady. Also, this world has magic, and you used a type of magic only the Capua royal family can, called space-time magic, to summon me here from my own world. Indeed, you are correct on all counts. It would seem you now understand what has happened. Also, you need not be so respectful with me. Titles and such are unnecessary. You may simply call me Ara. I am indeed this country's queen, but you are not one of my subjects. In fact, I have taken you from your world without warning, and might well be as a tyrant to you. You have no current obligation to refer to me as such, she said, giving a short, apologetic incline of her head. Right. Understood, ma'am, Zendro replied, wrenching his eyes away from the glance he had stolen at Aura's plentiful breasts when she bowed. It was his inability to absorb her words that had caused such a simple explanation to take the better part of an hour. It was hardly surprising, though. Being summoned to another world was not exactly something the average human could easily accept as fact. Aura hadn't lost her temper at his disbelief. She'd simply continued to repeat the facts, politely but firmly. Thanks to her patience, Zendro had finally come to accept that he was truly in a parallel world. The deciding factor had been the mount that a knight had brought over to the window at Aura's order, a dash drake. The creature was a huge lizard, about twice the size of a horse. It had snaked its head in through the garden side window and licked Zendro's face. The warm, realistic sensation erased his doubts about if this was a dream or some sort of prank. His cheek was still damp from the dash drake's grassy-smelling saliva. He wiped his face clean using a shirt sleeve and voiced his doubts. What I don't understand is why you would summon someone like me. He was just a normal Japanese guy with no particular skills. At the very least, he didn't think he held enough value for another world's queen to go out of her way to summon him. What is it you actually want from me? I'm not proud of it, but I can't use a sword, or magic either. Aura smiled at his careful admission, shaking her head. I have no intention of asking you to face such dangers for me. This western part of the southern continent may well have had a long history of war, but it is relatively peaceful nowadays. There's only one thing that I wish to ask of you, and that is for you to become my spouse. Spouse? He parroted uncomprehendingly, unable to divine the intention behind her words. Indeed, my spouse. You could also use the word husband. I'm asking you to marry me. Spouse, husband, marriage. Even Zenjiro, with his brain as frazzled as it was, could understand that. What? Marry you? Why? He cried, leaping to his feet. She seemed to have expected that response, as she simply chuckled and continued calmly. This conversation may take a while, but please listen to what I have to say. As I explained earlier, our country was previously embroiled in a long conflict. Fortunately, we emerged as one of the winners of that conflict, but the price was steep. The population decreased, our lands were ravaged, and the royal line has died out but for myself. Blessedly, the ceaseless efforts of the nation and its people make our prospects better than they would otherwise be, but there's still the issue of the royal family. I am the only member, and the bloodline may soon die out. It is therefore my absolute duty to marry. However, the space-time magic inherent to my family is linked to our bloodline, so I cannot marry just anyone. To safeguard the magic, it would be best to partner with someone else who carries that bloodline. Right, I see, he murmured instinctively, even though he didn't really see it all. He'd heard of the custom on Earth for royals to marry as closely as possible in order to maintain the purity of their bloodlines. And this world had a clear benefit in the form of inherent magic, so it was even more understandable. But in that case, he felt that he understood even less. Why me then? I'm from Earth. I don't know the first thing about magic, he said frankly. The reasoning is simple. You carry the blood of the Kappa family, she answered, smiling meaningfully. What? Once more, he simply couldn't grasp her meaning. It took more than 10 seconds for him to unpack those words. Once he did manage to process them, he started waving his arms around like a broken puppet, disputing her claim. Wait, what the hell? No, that's not possible, he denied profusely, but Aura merely pressed on. It happened 5 generations before me, about 150 years ago. It has been removed even from the royal histories, so I myself do not know the full details. But I heard that it started when the first prince of our country fell in love with someone he would not ordinarily be able to marry. It is said that she was either a commoner or a member of an enemy nation's royalty, but the truth is unknown. Regardless, the prince fell in love with someone he would not be allowed to marry, given his position as heir to the throne. And despite the objections from his parents, the king and queen would not be swayed. So the lovers, who would never be able to marry in this world, left for another world where they could be together. It sounds rather romantic, don't you think? At this point, Zenjiro could guess the rest of what Aura was planning to say. You're trying to tell me that I'm descended from them? Precisely, she answered, maintaining her smile at his incredulity. I did not simply perform a random summoning and hope for the best. I specifically aimed to summon a man with strong enough ties to the Kapwa bloodline, and you were the one who appeared. Therefore, I am quite certain that you are indeed their descendant. Even while a corner of his mind accepted her statements, he still had objections. But that's absurd. Actually, even if it were true, it was 5 generations ago, right? That'd make them my, great-great-great-grandfather and stuff. So wouldn't I only have inherited a tiny part of that bloodline? Indeed, I was in fact prepared for such an event. However, the blood of our royal family runs rather deeply within you. While not to the same extent as a member of the main line, it would be considered exceptional for a cadet branch. Enough so that, with training, you may well become capable of space-time magic yourself, she informed him with a slight nod. You can tell that? He asked, collapsing back into his seat at her earnestness. I can. Not whether you have the blood of royalty, but any mage can sense the latent mana potential of a person. You have a rather significant amount, Sir Zenjiro, almost to the level of royalty. There is no doubt that my summoning magic responded to the blood of the Kapwa running through your veins, and I would speculate that your mana levels are related to the strength of your inheritance. A pleasant miscalculation, I believe you could call it. It is almost as if the people who traveled to your world married closely to maintain the bloodline. Ah, right. That might make sense, actually. Zenjiro exclaimed with a sudden realization prompted by her words. You have some inkling as to why this may be? Aura asked, looking at him thoughtfully. I do. My family actually hails from a historically insular village. They used to only have 1 or 2 people marry into the village from outside each generation. Zenjiro had grown to dislike the unchanging insular nature of the Styx and had gone to university in the Kanto region, found work, and started a new life in the city. But this whole discussion did remind him that many of the people of that village, including his parents before they died in a car accident during his middle school years, were rather dark-skinned for Japanese people, with redder hair than was usual as well. Zenjiro himself, in fact, had swarthy skin for a Japanese person, and his hair was reddish-brown, just bordering on black. Aura placed a hand to her mouth and nodded in understanding. I see. So the isolation of the village prevented the royal bloodline from dispersing throughout the world. I think so, he agreed. It makes sense at least. For real? I'm not actually completely Japanese? I'm mostly from another world? I didn't have a clue about that, he thought to himself, keeping a tight smile on his face as he was assailed by panic. It did make sense. Too much sense. In contrast to Zenjiro's straight expression at the discovery of an unexpected ancestral secret, Aura's smile widened happily as she drew closer to him. You are indeed the partner I desire. So, Sir Zenjiro, though you may be confused by the sudden nature of these events, would you consider living in this world and becoming my husband? Aura's face turned serious, and Zenjiro calmed down a little as well as he began to think it over. Getting married to the beauty sitting before him was in and of itself not a bad proposition. As mentioned before, she was exactly Zenjiro's type. Their conversation thus far seemed to imply that she had a good personality as well. Of course, being a monarch required the ability to present yourself a certain way, so judging her personality from the conversation alone was dangerous. There was another problem, however. Ara's suggestion was not for her to marry him, but for him to marry her. If Zenjiro agreed, he would be bidding farewell to Earth. However much to his liking the woman before him was, that didn't mean he could readily abandon his job, friends, pleasures, and those cuisines he could only enjoy back home. Zenjiro's mind was moving sluggishly, still thinking that this all might be still a dream, and he didn't answer immediately. After a moment, he realized that he hadn't yet touched on the most important issue yet. I'm already here anyway, but what if, and this is only hypothetical, mind you, but what if I refuse? What happens then? He asked hesitantly, his fear obvious at a glance. She offered him a She answered with a reassuring smile to put him at ease as his face paled. In that case, as I bear the responsibility, I shall use unsummoning magic and return you to your world. I said as much initially, did I not? I believe my words were, should the circumstances not be to your liking, I swear on my honor that all shall be reverted to what it was. After all, I was the one to drag you into this world regardless of your wishes. If I am rejected, please rest assured that I shall at least wipe the slate clean. You should simply follow your heart and answer as you will. Ah, right. He let out a sigh of almost anticlimactic relief and leaned back into the sofa, his shirt clinging unpleasantly to his skin. He must have become drenched in sweat without even realizing it. In many instances where people were summoned to parallel worlds in manga and novels, the summoner often couldn't return them home, so the subject of the ritual normally had the choice forced upon them. It appeared, however, that Zenjiro would not be faced with such extremes. Whatever else may happen, it was fortunate that he could return if he wished. The revelation calmed his churning thoughts. Additionally, even if you choose to accept, I intend to briefly return you to your world first. If you are to part with your home, there will be people there that you must bid farewell to. Transferal magic is influenced by the alignment of the stars. It cannot be used freely at any time, but fortunately, the positions of the stars will be correct until tomorrow night. After that, the stars will be suitable for summoning again after 1 month. In essence, should you refuse, you will be returned home and that shall be the end of it. Should you accept, you will temporarily return home tomorrow, and I shall summon you once more a month hence. Wow, you can use it that frequently? No, we're merely blessed with a special alignment in the stars right now. After this month, the next opportunity will not be until 30 years have passed. There is no need to worry about it too much, but it is not the most convenient of circumstances. What? No way, 30 years? Zenjiro sputtered, losing all semblance of formality at her answer. That was way too long, and meant that he'd certainly be saying goodbye to Earth for good if he accepted. However, knowing that he could refuse and could return to his original world was a great help to Zenjiro's current mental state. A person's mind was a strange thing. If they were told that it was impossible, they would want to go home more than anything. But if told they could return, they'd start to wonder if they really had to. If everything she said is true, then it's a pretty sweet deal. I mean, I've got no family, no girlfriend. Works, well, it's going, but I can't say that I'm attached to the 150 hours of overtime every month. Now that he actually thought about it, today was the first Saturday he'd had off in half a year. Weekdays frequently had him getting home after midnight. Saturdays were work days as a matter of course, and about 3 Sundays per month were as well. The one saving grace was that the company did pay all the overtime worked. but he never had any chance to use that money. By the time he got home, he didn't even have the energy to cook for himself, so his dinners on weekdays were either boxed meals from a convenience store or eaten while he was out. Actually, it's probably been just as long since I've talked to a woman outside of shopping or work, he thought. So yeah, it's not like I'm that attached to my life back home. In his home world, he had no partner, and nothing but days full of work awaited him. In this world, an easy life and a marriage to a big-breasted beauty. When comparing the two options, his present situation could well be called striking gold, couldn't it? Those thoughts rushed through Zenjiro's mind in an instant, but his inherent wariness put the brakes on just as quickly. Whoa, hold up. Even if everything she said so far is true, there must be a catch. She's a queen, right? There have to be responsibilities that go along with marrying a queen. Royalty were political families from birth. You often saw hedonistic princes in novels and manga, but they were a small exception, and he'd heard that most royals were busy enough that he, as a working man, could sympathize with them. If that's what he'd be stuck with, he would probably be better off with the open exploitive nature of his current office job. Zenjiro took several discreet breaths and calmed his urge to decide immediately. If I were to accept, what would my responsibilities be? A queen's husband is still a type of royal, right? Aura smiled widely at the question, taking it as a good sign. Nothing in particular, she answered. At any rate, I am the 32nd ruler of the country, but in the history of the Kappa Kingdom, I am only the 3rd queen. My two predecessors both remained single for their entire lives, and the line of succession went through adoption to a child of a cadet branch with strong blood ties, and to a younger brother, who was still an infant when his sister took the throne, in those cases. In other words, says Zenjiro, you will be the first to marry a queen in this country's history. Aura was speaking as if he had already accepted, but Zenjiro currently lacked the composure to notice it. There was something else that he needed to comment on even more. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that the rights and responsibilities of a prince consort aren't defined at all here? A prince consort was the queen's spouse, though the word might not exist in this country, considering such a situation was unprecedented. She nodded calmly in response to his flustered question. Indeed, so the writings say. But rest assured, as you may infer from the fact that only 3 of the 32 rulers of this country has had were female, we are generally a patriarchal society. Regardless of how things are in the workplace, the man is the head of the house, and it is a virtue of a woman to treat her husband with respect. Whatever form it may take, I pledge to make our marriage meet your desires to the best of my abilities. Right, Zenjiro stammered mindlessly at the sweet words that had just left her mouth. Her answer was far better than he'd expected, so that was the most coherent response he could manage at the moment. If he took her words at face value, then not only would he have no further responsibilities, but Aura would do her utmost to accommodate him as well. This was way too good to be true. Even in his woolly-minded state, Zenjiro couldn't accept it without question. It was far too convenient. No, think it through. There's got to be an ulterior motive here, he thought frantically in the face of those amazing conditions. They were so good that they made him want to leap into it feet first. Besides, what does she get out of this? Continuing her bloodline? Is that really all? Yes, if every other member of the royal family had died, Zenjiro's strong ties would be awfully attractive. If that was the case, though, would she make it such a favorable opportunity? A family head that did nothing but procreate. Men like that were called spongers. If she's making her husband a sponger, maybe she's got a thing for layabouts? No way. If that wasn't the case, there must be some other significant gain for her to be making this proposal. If not, she wouldn't have immediately started with such an enticing offer, no matter how fitting Zenjiro was in regards to bloodlines. No, I need more information. Zenjiro remembered one of the seniors at work giving him some bitter advice. If you push a deal through without knowing it back to front, it'll bite you in the ass. So he asked her another question. Sorry to drag the topic back up again, but what will you do if I refuse? I can't imagine you won't marry, ma'am. Well, in that case, I would probably invite a noble in the country with relatively strong blood ties to be my groom. Well, I say strong, but they don't amount to much. That's why I went out of my way to summon you, she said with a self-deprecating smile. Right, so she has candidates in the country as well. I suppose that's obvious. Wait a minute. Maybe... Let's ask something a bit leading, he thought, another possibility coming to mind. He swallowed subtly so that Ara wouldn't notice, and asked his next question in as calm a voice as he could manage. Would said candidates be those with grandparents in the royal family? Ara didn't notice the leading nature of the question and simply gave a wry smile as she shook her head. Hardly. There is no one with such strong ties to the family remaining. The closest are examples where their great-grandfather's grandfather, or even better, their great-grandfather's mother, was in the royal family. Aha! Bingo! He mentally yelled, hiding his surprise behind a winning poker face. His superior in the company had told him, in business, it's important that it's conscious thought that controls your expression, not your emotions. That advice held true even in another world. Her answer was clearly strange. To show it numerically, the case with the great-grandfather's grandfather would mean they were 5 generations removed from the royal family, and 4 in the case with the great-grandfather's mother. On the other hand, there was Zenjiro's ancestor, who was 5 generations removed from Ara. If, as she had said, there were survivors who were 4 generations removed, then there would be no reason to summon Zenjiro, who was 5 generations removed himself. The village he had been raised in was insular, so he may have had very strong ties to the bloodline, but Ara couldn't have known that before the summoning. She'd actually called it a pleasant miscalculation. So, that would mean her explanation of needing to summon a groom from another world in order to bear an heir was a lie. Then why did she summon me? Was the whole thing about wanting to marry me a trick? No, if I start doubting that, there'd be no end to it. Zenjiro had no way of getting back to his world on his own. With that in mind, there was no need for Ara to manipulate him with honeyed words. She could just lie and tell him that there was no way home. She was probably trying to negotiate as faithfully as she could. In which case, I can consider both her wanting to marry me and the favorable conditions to be facts. It fits better, too. So then why? Why would she gamble and summon a descendant of royalty that fled to another world, and give such a good deal on top of it? Sir Zenjiro, are you well? Ah, sorry, I was just thinking. So, if I were to marry you, what would you ideally want me to do? I don't mean legally, just what you personally would want from me. Nothing in particular, she answered pleasantly with a slight shrug. Asking you to accept all this is also asking you to give up your home, your family, your whole life from before now. I'm not shameless enough to request even more of you, all things considered. All I wish is your aid in producing an heir to the throne. It seemed the only real expectation would be for him to have a child with the bosom beauty before him. At least, she seemed to be earnest enough when she stated that. I see, he mumbled. Her words were once again honeyed enough to drive a man to damnation. This time, though, Zenjiro had been prepared for her answer. I'm right then? Those conditions weren't just a sweet deal to entice me, but were exactly what she wanted to begin with. He mentally sorted through the information he'd acquired so far. There were nobles with stronger ties to the royal family than the descendant of the runaway prince. Regardless, Aura had still taken a gamble by summoning said descendant, Zenjiro, to be her groom. It turned out that he had rather strong ties to the bloodline, but that was merely a pleasant miscalculation. She told him that other than having a child with her, he could do what he wanted. The country was a patriarchal society, and queens were a rarity. Culturally, the husband was always the head of the family, and it was seen as a woman's virtue to treat her husband with respect. The few prior queens had all remained single, and this would be the first time a prince consort would exist in the country. From their conversation so far, he had seen her overwhelming charisma, and she seemed well qualified to be sovereign of the nation. He continued his questioning to prove his hypothesis. Just 2 more questions, please. If I moved here, where would I live? Most likely within the inner palace. Historically, the king would usually take several women as queen and concubines, so while it may be a little irregular, we would live in the inner palace. As he'd thought, there was little room left for doubt. He gulped and made his final query. Then, one last question. If I shut myself up in the inner palace after we marry, and have little contact with the outside world or anyone related to the palace other than you, and just spend my days lazing around, what would you think of that? Aura seemed unable to bear Zenjiro's suggestion and broke into the widest smile of the day so far. I would be most happy with that. That was when Zenjiro was sure he was correct on all fronts. Right, it's all making sense. She isn't just baiting me with a chance to do nothing. She actually wants a husband who won't do anything. A literal sponger would, in fact, be her ideal choice. Giving it some further thought, it wasn't all that strange. His mistake was weighing everything against the values gained from spending his days working for the almost sweatshop that his current employer ran. His job tired him out, so being given food, clothes, a home, and a hot wife was an attractive proposition for Zenjiro, but that wouldn't be the prevailing view in this world. Work for a prince consort would be nothing more than exercising his authority. Men who were uninterested in doing so would be in the minority. Even if that authority wasn't stipulated in the local laws, a prince consort here would gain that power. The country's very culture was focused on men, and the head of the household would be the man, even if that man had married into the family. If a virtue of a wife was to support her husband as much as she could, that meant the prince consort could use the fact that he was the patriarch to give orders to the queen herself. At the very least, if the consort were to voice an opinion in public, the queen would be unable to ignore it. Right, a nobleman would desire power, so if they became consort, in the worst case, they might usurp her authority. And even if they didn't go that far, they'd definitely work for their own family's gain first and foremost. It would create a dual-layered system of power, and if the worst should come to pass, it could divide the country and cause a civil war. Yeah, so it makes sense that she'd want to summon a groom from another world. There's no guarantee they wouldn't have political aspirations, but they at least wouldn't be pulling strings for their own family. It's worth it to her, even if it's only ensures they won't use their power for their own relatives. If you perused historical texts, you would see a great number of cases where the monarch's spouse's family created major issues for the country. Aura watched him as he thought it over and asked his questions, and once she judged that he had worked through things a bit, she spoke again. I am aware that asking for an immediate decision on such a life-altering choice is absurd. However, as I explained earlier, the summoning magic is dependent on the stars, so we have little time. You need not answer right now, But I do but do I ask that you make your choice I do ask that you make your choice by tomorrow morning. This has all been brought about due to my own circumstances. I swear again that should you refuse, no harm will befall you, and should you accept, I shall attend you as your wife as faithfully as I am able to. What are your thoughts, Sir Zenjiro? She entreated him with a gentle smile and a solemn gaze. Actually, the word solicited might be more appropriate, given the context. Right. Well, Zenjiro said, closing his eyes and turning everything over in his mind. If his thoughts and the hypothesis he now had were correct, this was a really good deal for him. But, as Ara herself had noted, he would have to leave behind his life on Earth. He wasn't perfect, but Yamai Zenjiro had supported himself until now, had his own morals, and lived according to them. His job was certainly tough, and he'd often been on the verge of resigning, but he'd lived self-sufficiently so far and was proud of it. You could call that pride his dignity as a man. If he were to accept her offer, it would mean throwing that dignity away and living off a woman's support. Could he do that? Was Yamai Zenjiro's dignity something he could discard so trivially? If I think about it calmly, I don't need to worry about it at all, he mused to himself. This wasn't something he needed to spend the night fretting over. He'd long since come to a conclusion. Steeling himself, Zenjiro opened his eyes and looked into Ara's reddish-brown ones. Let's get married, he declared, leaning over the table. Yes, Yamai Zenjiro's manly dignity could indeed be discarded that trivially. So, what do you guys think of the story so far? How would you feel being summoned to another world by a beautiful queen and have that queen ask you to become her husband and only expect you to just kind of sit around and bum around while she did all the work? In other words, stay out of her way. I gotta be perfectly honest. Would I jump on that? Hell yeah! Well, of course, the catch is this is another world, and even though there's magic and stuff, you know, there's modern day conveniences like the internet, electricity, flushing toilets. You know, man's gotta have needs. You know what I mean? I'm going to go ahead and read this next chapter, the intermission, which is intermission 1, and then I think we will go ahead and switch over to a different book because I can't read, you know, the whole books and stuff here because, you know, I'm only doing previews of these. But let me go ahead and hydrate here real quick. Intermission 1. The Queen's Private Discussion. Later that night, after the summoning of Yamai Zenjiro, Queen Aura I of the Kapwa Kingdom held an informal meeting with her most trusted advisors. A candlestick atop the table lit the room with a dim glow. Aura crossed her legs where she sat in a wicker chair fitting for the southern climate. She looked around at her gathered confidence and began to speak. So, how is he settling in? She asked, addressing an attendant with long blonde hair. He finally fell asleep a few moments ago, madam, the woman answered in a clear, high-pitched voice. I see. Good. However, he is something of a nightbird. It may best be to prepare more lighting for the inner palace, Aura murmured, resting her chin on her folded arms in thought. Zenjiro might have been more reluctant to accept her proposal if he had heard that evaluation. The time was only 10 o'clock. Zenjiro's normal weekdays had him getting home around midnight or even later, so this was actually a very early night for him. He'd purposely put the lights around the room out and gotten into bed, despite the fact that he did not yet feel tired. It was more out of consideration for the maids who would be unable to stop their work until he turned in. That being considered late, or him being seen as a night bird, would make him feel a little awkward. It was no wonder, though. In modern Japan, you could keep the lights on 24/7 if you felt like it. Here, you had torches, candles, lamps, things that were lit by flames, so nighttime would of course be seen in a fundamentally different way. There was an exceedingly small variety of establishments that were open at night. Even the palace, usually a hive of activity, had an ingrained view that the night is for sleeping. "In any case," said a slender-faced man from where he stood in front of her, "my congratulations on your engagement, Your Majesty. What is your estimation of Sir Zenjiro?" The speaker was a middle-aged fellow and looked to be some sort of official. He was Fabio de Bosch, Ara's secretary. A secretary would not ordinarily hold so much influence, but the Queen currently had no prime minister or marshal. The army and government were under her direct control, so his position as Queen's right hand meant that he had more power than his title indicated. The Queen shrugged at her trusted confidant's words and answered bluntly. He was a far sharper individual than I'd anticipated. He kept a cool head and showed a fair amount of courage. This could be called an unpleasant miscalculation, I suppose. Her judgment of him had sounded like praise at first, but calling it an unpleasant miscalculation was proof that she didn't want a particularly competent husband. Ara's ideal groom was a man who would surrender himself to extravagance and be satisfied with the money, women, and gourmet food. A man who held no political ambitions whatsoever. Particularly with his last questions, I believe he deduced my intentions. Despite this, he was willing to accept the marriage, Ara noted with a chuckle. He'd even directly asked her, "If I shut myself up in the inner palace after we marry and have little contact with the outside world or anyone related to the palace other than you, and just spent my days lazing around, what would you think of that?" It implied that he was completely aware of what she wanted her husband to do, or rather, what she would want him not to do. I originally thought him to have been raised as a common villager, but given his intelligence, it's possible for him to be a noble in his world, she added. It certainly seems plausible. I have my doubts about his manners and behavior, but he certainly doesn't appear to be an ignorant commoner. Her confidence nodded in agreement. He wasn't quite the useless hedonist they had been hoping for. At this point, they too were applying the values of their own world to the newcomer. And in this world, education was a right afforded to royalty, nobles, and some particularly rich families. As far as they were concerned, the majority of commoners were illiterate and uneducated, for better or worse. If you looked over the entire southern continent, there were certainly facilities that could open doors for commoners, but Ara and her confidants were unable to imagine a country like Japan where there were 9 years of compulsory education for all citizens. In that case, it would seem likely that he has some ulterior motive for accepting your offer. If you decide to annul the arrangement, we will simply cancel the resummoning next month, offered the aged man who had stood at her side when Zenjiro was first brought over. He wore purple robes and was the court mage, Espiridion. Ara let out a dismissive sniff and waved her hand. "Don't make me laugh, old man. Besides, who would you have me marry instead? The hungry wolf of the Guyen family? Or perhaps the puppet of the Marquez family? We just lived through a war. Such decisions would see the Capua kingdom fall to internal strife." The old man gave a pained smile at her harsh censure, stroking his long ashen beard as he supported the men in question. Your Majesty, I feel that is excessive. Sir Pujol of the Guyenne family is a great commander, and Lord Raffaello of the Marquez family is an extremely talented official. I am fully aware of their positions. I am the one who gave them those positions. However talented they may be, a man of unlimited ambition or a boy who jumps at his family's every demand are unsuitable candidates to be my groom. Her estimations of the men were harsh, but by no means incorrect, so the aged man said nothing more. Then you shall indeed wed Sir Zenjiro? Asked Fabio. I shall, she confirmed with a simple nod. I may have concerns about his intelligence being greater than expected, but he passes in regards to his personality. At the very least, there is no comparison to the hungry wolf or the family's marionette. Much of the royal family's blood runs in his veins, so much so that even he himself may be able to use space-time magic in addition to ensuring that his children inherit it, at least the basics of it. In that case, even the nobles should have no legitimate objections. Succession in the Kalpa royal family was legitimized by inheritance of the magic inherent in their bloodline, the space-time magic. So that made Zenjiro eminently suitable to marry the queen. The number of inherent magic users itself contributed to the country's strength. If Zenjiro developed the ability to use space-time magic in the not-too-distant future, there could be no outright resistance to their marriage. However, he is from another world entirely, not just of a different social standing. Even if you marry, I believe there may be multiple problems with his ability to build a family, Esperion counseled, concerned about what the future might hold. Ahara laughed back meaningfully. Well, that would be a problem regardless of who I marry. It is all a matter of my sincerity and effort afterward. As I told him this afternoon, this is all for my own convenience. As long as it is not a thoughtless demand that would impact national politics, I'll accept any request from him. The sincerity she had shown during her discussion with Zenjiro earlier was no mere facade. Emotionally, she felt indebted to him after dragging him into this situation arbitrarily, and logically, it also made sense to treat the man who would become her husband in good faith. A husband wasn't a subordinate, he was family. If things went well, he would be a companion who she would share her life with for decades to come, skin meeting skin on many occasions. A quarrel would just exhaust them. Understood. That is a family matter, so I shall leave it to you, Your Majesty. However, the heir, or lack thereof, is a matter for the kingdom. So, if the worst should come to pass, and there is some incompatibility in matters of the night, please report it immediately. It is fortunate indeed that Sir Zenjiro has strong enough ties that we can expect him to acquire space-time magic. There are several women with ties to the royal family as strong as Lord Raffaello and Sir Pujols that currently reside within the kingdom. This frank, extremely rude statement came from Fabio. Until now, the only person capable of space-time magic had been Ara, so her bearing a child was the best proposition for the kingdom. But with Zenjiro's arrival, there was now a man with strong enough blood ties to potentially use the magic himself, albeit not as well. This presented the extreme possibility that the precedent set by previous queens might be maintained, with Ara remaining single and the heir being a child born of Zenjiro and a noblewoman who possessed some relation to the royal family. The queen's marriage would always cause a conflict between law and culture. The monarch reigns supreme versus the man is the head of the family. If they knew about Zenjiro, there would be many noblewomen with ties to the royal line who would use that as a pretense to annul the marriage between him and the queen, and change it to a marriage between Zenjiro and themselves. In a way, the newcomer was both an opportunity and an explosion waiting to happen. Queen Ara showed no anger at her confidant's bluntness and crossed her legs once more as she sat upon her chair, letting out another meaningful laugh. Indeed, a problem for the future, but one I have already considered to an extent. I believe your concerns are unwarranted. Child making should go well. Oh? May I ask what gave you such confidence? The mage asked with great curiosity. She smiled back at him and answered, a simple matter of biology. I took my dinner tonight across the table from my groom, but his gaze was quite clearly focused on my chest. He may have intended to hide it, but it was without a doubt a carnal gaze. It would appear that my body will suffice to stimulate his libido. As she spoke, she thrust out those sizable breasts proudly. What was a glance for a man was an examination for a woman, and Zenjiro's wicked thoughts had been laid bare before the queen. I actually kind of forgot that I really liked this book in the opening. It's pretty interesting. I'm really tempted to continue reading this. Which, this would take us into chapter 1, which... basically... not too long, but like I said, we've kind of covered a good bit. We're like 35 pages roughly into the book and stuff now, so... that was the intro preview into The Ideal Sponger Life. Like I said, if you like the book, if you think the story is interesting and, you know, worth kind of taking a look, there's also a manga version of this available as well as the light novel. I believe both are actually being published by J Novel Club. So if you do want to go check them out, what is it? I think it's jnovel.club. Let me just check that real quick. Yep, jnovel.club. And by all means, go check it out. Take a look and stuff like that. Or if there's other places you might find it, by all means, go hit them up and have a look. So, that being said, like I said, I'd love to continue reading this, but I really can't. So the next story. Nope, read those. Where is... hang on, I'm looking for this one. I thought that I had it in my iBooks already, but it's not here. Bummer. Alright, fine. So, you know what? Let me do this. Alright, so that was Ideal Sponger. Ideal Sponger Life. I had just recently read D-Genesis. Actually, last week, I'd read D-Genesis 3 years after the dungeons appeared. So, you know what? Let me switch this up. Okay, can't do any of those. Okay, this is kind of meta, but why not? Give me a sec. Let me go ahead and pull this open. I remember reading this. pretty sure that that is not the cover. Let me grab the cover to this. At least as soon as iBooks decides to straighten itself out. Okay. So I think this is actually going to be getting an anime at some point, most likely. I think that'd be pretty funny. Let me pull this, and it's sideways, which is kind of a drag, but all right, time to switch up. So let me grab the new cover here. For crying out loud, come on already. Okay. So, yes, I am aware this is sideways, which is kind of annoying. You know, let me do this. Let me transform it and rotate it 90 degrees. Clish. Now put it all over in the... Damn it. Okay, fine. So... I know this is kind of meta, but the name of this book is Vtuber Legend. How I went viral after forgetting to turn off my stream. So yes, it is a novel about VTubers. Go figure. In fact, it was kind of funny because I had just started reading this pretty much right before, right as I was starting to kind of like look at streaming, and just before I kind of started getting into streaming. I mean, at this point I hadn't really started, you know, I hadn't thought about streaming at this point, but I, you know, like I actually started reading this like at some point last year. And it just happened to be right in timing, like, you know, watching a lot of clip channels and stuff, and watching like, you know, clips of a lot of the more popular VTubers and stuff out there. And I was like, okay, at that point I hadn't even heard of VTubers. And I had literally just finished reading the first book, the first volume, and then that's when I kind of discovered, like, oh wow, hey, VTubers on clip channels on YouTube. I wasn't even on Twitch at that point, but so anyhow, let me go ahead and let me hydrate real quick. And then I'm going to go ahead and start reading the first volume, like the prologue of this. I'll keep this kind of short. Prologue. Thank you for tuning in again today, everyone. Let's meet again when the light hits snow falls. Thank you. Another fun stream. You've been streaming every day, though. How much light snow are we gonna get? We get light snowfall every day. Figure it out, dude. Light snow every day. The most gentle weather anomaly ever. Once the flow of comments tapered off, I ended the stream. It seemed like my PC was frozen. Something must be wrong, I thought. Come on. I clicked away at my mouse, but there was no response. I wasn't great with computers, so I didn't know what I was supposed to do in this kind of situation. Oh? Though I still had no clue what was going on. It looked like the stream window had closed at least. Good, good. With a sigh, I stood up and walked across my apartment, where I lived alone, to the refrigerator. As I did, my mind made the complete changeover from the VTuber named Awayuki Kokorone to the 20-year-old unemployed woman named Yuki Tanaka. Yes, unemployed. I'm not a uni student, nor do I even have a part-time job, so I'm a genuine NEET. Please don't look at me so coldly. I have a good reason for it. Right out of high school, I'd gone to work for a company that had turned out to be one of those totally exploitative ones you heard about occasionally. Day in, day out, they'd run me ragged. That job had been my first taste of adulthood, and had already drained all the life from my eyes. The only mental support I'd had through it all had been the gorgeous VTubers of Livon, now one of the leading VTuber management companies in Japan. In the chaotic realm of VTubers, every streamer developed their own beautifully vivid world. One look at that realm, and I'd been hooked. I'd started using my already limited free time to keep tuning in every day. Gradually, I'd become so absorbed that it had turned into my only reason for living. Still, though I'd managed to hang on with my paltry income, life had been whittling me down. In the thrall of overwork, the light in my eyes had faded until they'd essentially become black holes, when what should have graced me but a piece of news to brighten them right up. Livon, now recruiting members for the 3rd generation. Frankly, I thought it was impossible. I'd been so nervous when I'd gone for the interview that I still didn't remember what I'd said to them. But in yet another bout of divine trickery, perhaps, I'd somehow actually gotten the part. I was given a new alter ego, Awayuki Kokorone, a poetic name. The first is written with the characters for Light Snow, and the last is a combination of the characters for Heart and Music Note. My avatar was tall for a girl, with straight, waist-length black hair, pale white skin, and attention-grabbing light purple eyes, suggesting that something more lay just beneath the surface. And, to really make those beautiful, mysterious visuals pop, she wore a noble-style dress whose whites and blues seamlessly harmonized with one another. My manager had told me that the illustrator had used me as a model when creating her. I certainly don't think I'm anywhere near as pretty. Anyway, after getting into the field 3rd generation, I'd immediately quit my job. I was sure a lot of people would say that had been a pretty hasty decision, but VTubers are busy people. Not much choice there, eh? That was a lie. I'm sorry. I just couldn't work in such an exploitative environment for any longer. My shitty mentality wasn't strong enough to hack it. But I'll do so many streams as a VTuber and I'll get a ton of fans and bask in the glorious monetization. Woohoo! That had, at least, been what I thought back then. Back when I'd still believed I could make those obviously ambitious dreams a reality. To be perfectly blunt, I hadn't gotten popular. Seriously, I hadn't. I'd have to solve that problem before worrying about getting monetized. It had already been 3 months since my debut, but I had only half the channel subscribers and livestream audience compared to the other streamers who debuted alongside me. In fact, the more time went by, the more my numbers dwindled. I called myself a NEET earlier, and I know some people might wonder how a corporate VTuber could qualify for that title. However, in Livon, while you, the streamer, receive a large share of the super chats, that doesn't mean your income is anywhere close to stable. And given my current popularity, the super chat option wasn't even available to me to begin with. I'd been managing to keep myself afloat with all the money that my penny-pinching tendencies had forced me to save during my days working in my old office job. Maybe I just don't have enough oomph. My manager was always telling me to be myself a little more, but what did she even want from me? And what does she mean, be yourself? How do you know who I really am? Did I do something crazy during that interview? I got a headache whenever I thought about it all. The impending doom of my savings was mentally taxing enough already. Actually, I had a second weapon for soothing my aches and pains other than Vtubers, and that was hidden right here in this refrigerator. I can't live without it anymore. A monstrous beverage. It had been created for the sole purpose of getting you drunk. It would wipe away all your exhaustion in the blink of an eye. That's right, Strong Zero. I walked back to the desk I'd been using to stream and set the nice, chilled, fruity chew high washing through my body. Phew. I don't even know if this stuff tastes good anymore, but I'm at a point where I can't end my day without having one. And I'd never held my booze that well, so I got drunk right away. It's super cheap and gets you slammed. Stro Zero is the best. That's good. Now I'm feeling better. It's like my inner power is being released and I love it. I freaking love it. I'd do anything for a can of this stuff. Even work for an underground empire for unreasonable pay. Kaiji drank beer, but what about Stro Zero? I started talking to myself like in an IQ of precisely 3. Amayuki always spoke in a very prim and proper way, fitting for a young gentlewoman, but all traces of her were completely gone now. I carried on with my non-stop drinking and emptied the 350mm can in the blink of an eye, but my body was too far gone. This wasn't enough to satisfy it. I already had a hand on the second can I'd brought with me from the fridge, and psh, that's the good stuff. God, I love the sound of cracking open a tall one. That's right. In my thirst for booze, I'd grab the most devilish of all inventions, a tall can. More audible gulps came as I, Yuki, downed that one too. It was too bad that I had to be so proper and ladylike all day at work. Awesome. Time to tune in to my fellow third generationers. To my fellow third geners. Woohoo! It didn't take long before I started feeling good. And since today's stream from Hikari Matsuya, a streamer in the same generation as me, had been archived, I started watching that. I still hadn't actually met Hikari-chan, but she'd been super nice to me ever since our debut, even though my lame streams were nothing to write home about. Seriously, she was such a good girl. An angel. I love her. Her character was an energetic 16-year-old, fairly short, and had this unique full-face smile that always made me want to laugh along with her. Plus, her streams were always these explosions of brilliance, every bit as joyful as her appearance, and fitting for the Matsuri part of her name, which meant festival. She got a ton of comments too, and the way she laudably committed herself to the VTuber life earned her plenty of fan adoration. At this point, she was like the beating heart of the third gen. I'd done a few collab streams with her, but how should I put this? She was like purity and innocence personified, and I totally ended up feeling like I was her mother. My face and tone grew super serious as I said aloud, "Yes, I will be her mommy." I apparently had a habit of talking to myself more than usual while drunk. Or rather, the words in my brain just ignored all filters and came out of my mouth as is. I was normally shy in front of strangers, and I very seldom drank with anyone else, so while it hadn't caused me any problems yet, it did make things dicey. Not that I could stop drinking Stro Zero even if I tried. I really just can't do it. Seriously. I watched the stream, laughing uproariously throughout, without a shred of class. Hikaru was playing a video game for the stream called Wiener Legend, fittingly subtitled Sexkin Denetsu. In the game, you fought other players using wieners stuck on forks as swords. It really gave you a sense for how crazy the developer must be. And, well, the theme of the game being what it was, Most of the players had these awful dirty jokes and puns for usernames. Holy crap. Cooter juice kills me. Nah, Lamau, that just doesn't have anything to do with wieners. I was riding that shoe high. Baby, meaning the stupidest, most vulgar jokes were hysterical to me. Oh, and the craziest part of this stream was that Hikari-chan was so pure that she'd just say all of them out loud, since she didn't know dirty jokes at all, except for the super obvious ones. She's catnip for the kind of pervert who thinks of himself as a gentleman. The hell, why am I so hard? I laughed. I'm supposed to be your mommy here, but I'm so hard watching your stream. I finished up watching the video, laughing my ass off the entire time. Man, her streams were godlike, and she was just amazing. I could see why she'd gotten popular. No reason she wouldn't have. Compared to her, I'm just... It's getting late, so maybe I'll just watch Kami-san's stream and go to bed. Reality can make you sad at 2 in the morning. I started up another archive stream from one of the other Gen 3 streamers named Chami Yaganase. Chami-chan went in a different direction with her content than other VTubers, mainly focusing on a variety of ASMR streams. And coming from that lady with such a voluptuous, attention-grabbing body and that short blonde hair and those blue eyes, it was amazing. She kept her soft voice mostly emotionless, which really made me sleepy. I doubted any VTuber could compete with her when it came to putting people to sleep. Hey. She'd apparently done one of her ear cleaning streams today. With how drunk I was, that was definitely going to knock me right out. Ah, crap. This stream is just as addictive as Stro Zero is. A powerful drowsiness washed over me almost immediately, and I was fast asleep within moments. And there I was, snoring loudly, completely unaware that my smartphone was ringing off the hook. As the scorching sunlight of a clear morning shone in my eyes, I awakened. Ugh. Oh crap, I think I'm gonna barf. Stro Zero is fun when you're drinking, but the hangovers are the worst. I wish they'd do something about that. Not that I'd ever stop drinking. This was what I woke up to every day at this point. My morning hellscapes had become routine. Changing it up now would be worse for me anyway. Yeah. If I said something like that on stream, all the comments would be like, huh? That would never happen though. I put too much emphasis on being say-so, clean and pure, during my streams. I never drank on them. Just as I finally convinced myself to stand up and get some water or something, I heard my smartphone ringtone going off. This early? Apparently it was from my manager, Suzuki-san. She was one of the younger managers at LiveOn, going on 24 this year. Her straightforward attitude of always tackling everything head-on, no matter how troublesome, was what had landed her in that managerial position. Rumor had it, she was first in line for moving up even further in LiveOn too. She had it where it counted. She always fussed over my personal life so that I could focus on my streaming. I owed a lot to her at this point. In fact, she had specifically requested to be my manager. According to her, when I'd asked why, her reply had been this: well, I just felt like I would be the only one who could possibly keep up with you, Yuki-san. It was incomprehensible to me. She both looked and acted like an athletic, outdoorsy type of person. Was there something my indoor nature was blinding me to? Hello? Oh, Yuki-san. Thank goodness you picked up. Huh? Wonder what's wrong, I thought. In contrast to my listless grunt, Suzuki-san's voice was audibly panicked. I asked, what's going on? Shh, don't talk. We can't have any personal information of yours getting out, so I need you to say as little as possible. And I need you to listen to what I'm about to say as calmly as you can. Huh? Whatever it was, it had made Suzuki-san cut me off mid-sentence. And if I'd been half asleep before, the danger in the term personal information solved that problem quite handily. Wait, have I done something awful without realizing it? Listen to me calmly, alright? She paused, then finally said, "Turn off your stream. Turn off your stream. Turn off your stream. Turn off your stream." The words looped endlessly in my mind. Forgetting to turn off your stream, at worst, could reveal personal information. It was one of the things VTubers had to be very careful about. That problem actually hit another, more devilish one. And, for better or worse, since I'd spent way too much time watching VTuber streams, I knew exactly what it was. You guessed it. Whether or not any potentially harmful personal information gets out, usually when someone forgets to end their stream, the viewers get to hear them out of character. VTubers roleplay as their own characters, their avatars, so the audience pretty much never gets to witness how they actually speak or act. Such a rare exposure of my true self could only mean that the viewers would start bullying me and attacking me relentlessly. An electrifying dread shot through me. Immediately, the problems my PC had been having when I tried to end the stream yesterday flashed through my mind. I opened the streaming window on my computer as I broke out in a cold sweat all over. And there I saw. "Morning. Are you watching? Loved your strong drinking stream. It was so different from how you usually are that it went way past regular gap mowing to something totally new. Light snow, more like a blizzard, lol. Great. It's finally time for you and I to be Hikari-chan's mommy and get hard for her together. The girl who compared Strozero to her genmate's ASMR streams. I have witnessed a legend. This stream would later leave its mark in VTuber history. Why do so many of the self-professed pure and wholesome VTubers end up being like this? My sides were literally in orbit. You were just acting so genuine I can't bring myself to hate you, Lamau. This. Now I want to drink Strozero with you." What the? No! The scream came out involuntarily. Despite the early morning hour, the comments section was scrolling so fast I couldn't keep up with it. More importantly, my viewer count was way higher than my average right now. In fact, when I looked more closely, my subscriber count was in line with the others in the 3rd gen. Actually, with the rate it was increasing, it would soon exceed those. Crap. This was giving me a headache. Congrats on #1 trending worldwide. The girl who took over the world just by drinking Strozero at her computer. #1 worldwide? Frantically, I checked the trending rankings on Cheaper, the most used social media and site in Japan. I couldn't believe my eyes, but there it was. The name Aoyuki Kokorane in first place in the world, not even just Japan. With the hashtag accidentally live a little below that. I've got to hand it to you, Yuki-san, continued my manager. Ever since seeing your interview, I'd always been prepared for when you finally snapped, but I never thought it would be you forgetting to turn off your stream. I should have expected a curveball from you. I'll redouble my efforts to support you from now on. Too much was happening. Suzuki-san's words didn't reach my mind. Actually, the hangover combined with my head not processing anything was making me feel pretty sick. Oh, this is bad. This noise was too dirty to express in writing. Finally, while vomiting, I managed to push the stop streaming button. The stream became a legend, both because I'd forgotten to turn it off and because of the way I had turned it off. It would go down in history as the stream that ended with a barf. So, that was the first prologue section of Vtuber Legend, How I Went Viral After Forgetting to Turn Off My Stream, Volume 1. I guess a little bit meta, but you know, hey. I just thought it'd be a good, interesting little thing to kind of throw out there real quick. It's been a while since I've actually read it, so I've kind of forgotten how it actually went. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. A little bit of a brief thing, and, you know, kind of reading again. There were some parts that I kind of felt. But hey. Let's see here. So, Doctor, where shall we go next? How about I find something to load real quick? Jeez, come on. Okay, let's switch this out again, and let's... So what do you think? Should we guys kind of... Nope, definitely can't read that one. I've actually read that. Oh, that's why I don't have all the books handy on here. Nope. Can't read these, And... Okay. How about this one? My Quiet Blacksmith in Another World. Let me go ahead and pull this up. And let's update the cover art, shall we? So the real question is, can I get this? Undo rotation. All right. Let's switch the cover. And there we go. All right. But first, let me do a quick stretch here. Because, you know, I've been sitting for like almost 2 hours and stuff. Alrighty. So, anyhow. So, this is My Quiet Blacksmith Life in Another World. So, give me a sec, let me hydrate, and get set back up again, and I will start up in a moment. So, 1 sec. Prologue. The Hero and the Demon Queen. Within the deepest recesses of the Demon Kingdom, there stood a castle with the throne room at its heart. Here, the Demon Queen reigned over the land. In this place, two enemies were locked in combat. One was a handsome young man, whose lithe physique belied a fierce inner strength. He was equipped with a full set of armor and a slender longsword, both forged from silver. Overall, he was a remarkable example of a hero. His opponent, the wielder of a black rapier, could have been mistaken for a bewitching woman, except for the ram horns sprouting from her head and the sinister robe that enshrouded her. She was the mistress of this castle, the Demon Queen. Without exchanging a single word, the two fighters lunged toward one another, their swords clashing in the middle. The Demon Queen met the hero's brutal slash head-on, and although the rapier was slimmer than the hero's longsword, her blade blocked the attack with ease. A lesser sword would have snapped in two. They disengaged for a moment, only to jump back into the fray. This time, the hero repelled the Demon Queen's thrust with the flat of his blade. His longsword readily absorbed the impact, deflecting a blow that would have pierced clean through a regular sword. Their blades met again and again, as both parties wielded their chosen weapons with perfect confidence. The battle wore on, and eventually, their expressions took on identical shades of bewilderment. Both the hero and the Demon Queen had equipped themselves with a god-tier weapon, so it was unfathomable to them that this battle had not yet ended. The same thought lingered in each fighter's mind. Shouldn't my opponent's weapon have long reached its limit under this assault? Their shared puzzlement soon brought them to a halt. They both lowered their swords simultaneously. The hero spoke first. "Demon Queen, I have a question for you, unrelated to our fight." "Fine," she replied. "I have one for you as well, likely along the same lines. Then, if I may, which blacksmith forged your sword?" "Just as I suspected," she remarked. "I wanted to ask who forged yours." "It must have been... yes. A certain stubborn and grizzled blacksmith made my rapier," the Demon Queen confirmed. She sheathed the weapon and showed her blade's pommel to the hero. Imprinted upon it was a plump cat squatting on its haunches. The hero turned his own pommel to face the Demon Queen, displaying the same insignia. "I see. Damn that geezer." The Demon Queen sighed. "He must have forged both of our weapons, knowing that this was going to happen. How conniving." "There's no point in fighting any longer," the hero said. "We could always see whose strength fails first. It's clear that we're equal in that regard." "True," the Demon Queen conceded. "No matter which of us wins, ultimately exhaustion would leave the victor vulnerable to attack. It's meaningless to continue." "Well then, I suppose there's only one option." "Yes, let's agree to a truce, at least during our generation." "I'll let him know too, alright?" said the hero. "Go ahead, I have no objections. If we tell him, then neither of us will have to draw his ire, and it'll keep us both in check. After all, it would be troublesome if one of us offended that humorless grump, and he backed the other side." "Okay, I'll proceed as discussed. Until we meet again." "Farewell, hero," the Demon Queen said, turning on her heel. "Now then, I must prepare a proclamation." They exited the throne room in opposite directions. Although the air had been thick with tension at the beginning of the battle, the hero and the Demon Queen, polar opposites in all regards, now wore the same expression of wry amusement as they recalled a blacksmith whose commonplace features were weathered by age. Chapter 1. My life begins in another world. When I woke up, I was on my back, and a cloudless blue sky hung high above me. Sitting up, I realized that I'd awoken in a woodland clearing surrounded by lush green plant life. At a glance, it looked like any other forest in Japan, but that was impossible. I was no longer on Earth, or even in the same universe. I was now in a completely new world. Our story began on a day like any other. Back on Earth, I used to work as a software engineer, toiling away 7 days a week plus holidays and overtime in order to meet my release deadlines. One night, I was on my way home after work. It was around midnight, and I was heading toward the train station. Exhaustion had already claimed me, and I was dead on my feet. But then I saw a stray cat stagger onto the road. It seemed as unsteady as I was, and as I looked on, it stumbled right into the middle of the street. Suddenly, I noticed that a truck was barreling straight for it. Maybe the driver was drowsy or on their phone. Maybe they were just being careless. Regardless, they showed no sign of slowing down at all, and gave no indication that they'd even seen the cat. I was also barely managing to stay awake at that moment, so my speculation could be unreliable. As soon as I processed what was happening, I sprinted for the cat. The truck and I were converging from different directions, and the race was on. It was anyone's guess who might reach the cat first. The truck had me beat in terms of speed, but I'd started close from my target. I rapidly closed in on the cat, lifted it up by the torso, and flung it out of the way. Unfortunately, considering what happened next, the truck won our contest by a landslide. What did it win, you ask? That's a discussion for another time. There was a sickening thud. The impact knocked me off my feet and tossed me into the air. Nonsensically, some stories about parents lifting vehicles to save their kids rushed through my head as everything faded to black. I wasn't sure how much time had passed before I'd awoken, or, to be more precise, regained consciousness. A blank white expanse surrounded me, and I was floating within it. I couldn't even see my own body, but I felt both perfectly alert and half asleep at the same time. It was as if I'd been suspended in a vague sense of semi-existence. "Hey, you're awake?" The words were delivered in the voice of a young woman. "If you can call it that, then yes," I replied, confused by my current perception of reality. I wasn't exactly hearing her. I assumed that the voice belonged to a woman. To clarify, no sound waves were reaching my ears. I also wasn't really speaking, since speech was defined as air passing from the lungs through the vocal cords to produce vibrations. Telepathy might be a more fitting term for our communication. She was projecting her thoughts toward me, and likewise, I sent my thoughts toward her. It was a circuitous interpretation of a conversation. "Looks like I've managed to preserve your soul, even if I had to overreach my authority to do so," said the voice. "What do you mean?" I asked. "In short, you died in your world. Normally, your soul would have been disassembled and repurposed into new resources," she explained. "You were a software engineer, right? In technical terms, a section of memory containing your soul would have been deallocated if I hadn't locked it first. I wasn't supposed to do that, though." "I more or less understand the situation," I said. "So now what?" I felt oddly serene, even though she just casually informed me that I was dead. "That's good. I want you to stay calm. I'm terribly sorry, but I've had to temporarily rewire your consciousness to suppress your fear of dying. Otherwise, your soul would start to deteriorate. In other words, the garbage collector would have seen the flag for deallocation and automatically deleted your soul to free up memory. At that point, you would have ceased to exist both physically and figuratively." "All right," I said, still at peace. "Thank you for your understanding. Moving along, do you remember saving a stray cat?" "Yes, of course. I love cats." "That's right. Although I was over 40 and my looks regularly attracted police attention, I loved small animals and was particularly fond of cats. That day, I'd been physically worn out from the combination of my advancing age and lots of consecutive overtime. I'd been mentally exhausted from burnout. My love of cats was the final star in a miraculous constellation, albeit an unlucky one, and the result was an unthinkable heroic dash to my death. All of that rambling boiled down to one simple statement. I love cats. That cat was me, said the voice. I was on duty as a watchdog, but of course, that means nothing to you. Let's see. Are you familiar with parallel universe theory? Yes, it often appears in sci-fi and fantasy, I replied. Good, that'll make this conversation easier. My job is to patrol different universes and watch for catastrophic cross-world events. That is, any event in one world that would negatively impact another. I sensed a trace of pride in her not voice. Indeed, it was a job that no human could perform. That's pretty impressive, I said honestly. There are pros and cons to the job, but more cons, I'd say. I guess I shouldn't have bothered with the compliment. In any case, yes, it's not something that just anyone can do. There are dire consequences if a watchdog misses a warning sign and allows an event to proceed unhindered. Anyway, enough about me. Back to the explanation. She sat up straighter. At least, that's how it felt to me, and carried on. While I was patrolling your world as a cat, I made a mistake that should have led to my death. That's when you saved me. Currently, we're in a liminal space that I can access. Could that truck really have killed you? I asked straight out. It'd be a vital flaw in the system for someone with such critical responsibility to be mortal, just the same as any other living being. My temporary body would have died, but not my soul. My body for any given world is chosen from the native fauna, and my physical abilities are limited accordingly. It'd be hard for me to just pass unnoticed otherwise. This way, even if I die, I leave no trace. However, dying is still a major problem because I can't fulfill my duty until I get another body. I'm sure that losing your physical body has left you in a bit of a pickle too. A pickle, she said, as if this wasn't the biggest mess I'd ever been in. Anyway, she continued, I have one caveat to add to our parallel universes discussion. Do you think that most worlds only differ from each other in trivial ways? Yes, as far as I know. At least, that's the way it's portrayed in books and games. Here are two comparative scenarios. In one world, you decide to stop for a drink after work, thus causing you to take a train that happens to be delayed, so you return home very late. In another world, you go straight home without a hitch. Do you think this is how multiverse theory functions? Seems right. To be blunt, that's not how it works. Worlds aren't actually created at the turn of a dime. In our example, your decision to get a drink becomes part of that world's natural equilibrium. If you were to go straight home on your regular train instead, you would throw off the balance. The disembodied voice continued. Maybe you arrive home early and overhear a couple arguing. You report it to the police. The couple's relationship crumbles. As a result, they never give birth to a child, and the harmony of the world is disrupted. The whole thing is a bit more nuanced, but the saying still applies. There are no might-have-beens in history. The explanation made sense as long as I didn't think about it too hard. I kept quiet and urged her to continue. I've gotten a little sidetracked, but in a nutshell, that's how parallel worlds work. Needless to say, since universes don't infinitely branch off of each other, there aren't any clones of you in worlds similar to your own. There's only you, and you weren't supposed to have died yet. When you saved my life at the expense of your own, you introduced a bug into the system. One that affects the world, your own life, and mine as well. 3 fates were changed, each in a different way. And world alterations are preventable only if we fill the hole you've left behind. The quickest way to restore balance would have been to rewrite the timeline and say that you miraculously survived without a scratch. However, that road is closed to us. Fundamentally, my job as a watchdog is to report on the state of the multiverse. My accounts of events are logged in many different worlds. Because I witnessed it, your death in that world cannot be reversed. The conversation had taken a rather drastic turn for the worse. Then it sounds like we're out of options. Why'd you bother preserving my soul? I asked. There is one more option. We can find a replacement for you in your world, and then send you to a different one, she replied. That's possible? From what you've said so far, it doesn't seem like that would be allowed, I remarked. How do I put this? She pondered aloud. There are several worlds that are experiencing the same predicament as yours. Those universes contain voids where someone's existence should be. We can send people across the multiverse to fill those open spaces. That said, you'll have to choose from the worlds in my docket, so there's a limited number of places you can go. Basically, you're swapping with someone else, right? I asked. You catch on quick. That's the gist of it. You'd still be considered dead in your original world, but you can live on in a new one. I see. Can I ask a question? Of course, please do, she said. Why keep me alive at all? Oh, right. I was going to get to that. One reason is for my peace of mind. I wouldn't be able to rest easy knowing that someone died because of my mistake. Don't tell anyone I said that, though. I want you to remember that we need to preserve the system's equilibrium. Strangely, I find it hard to accept that you're now asking me to take this in stride, I said. In any case, I don't have a choice, right? I'm sorry, but no, you don't. However, you'll be able to choose your destination. Plus, in your new world, you'll be granted certain privileges, cheat abilities. They won't be anything that'll break the rules of the world or the multiverse, so rest assured, you can ask for anything you want. Let's see, I said, taking my time to think. My cheat ability couldn't be so overpowered that it would throw the world off kilter, huh? How do I make the most out of my second shot at life? After a moment, I had my answer. Well, I like making scale models and working with my hands in my time off, so I'd like to live in a place, preferably alone, where I can create things for a living. I'd like a compatible skill set for that life. And as I said before, I like cats, so if I could have a quiet life with a cat as a companion, I'd have no complaints. All right, she said, pausing to consider the options. Out of the available candidates, the world that would best accommodate your requests is a typical fantasy realm with swords and sorcery. How does that sound? Fine by me. All right, now, on to your skills. What do you want to make? I've always wanted to try swordsmithing, I suggested. Then a blacksmith would likely be the most fitting profession. You'll need language and crafting skills. I can also throw in some fighting skills for your self-defense. As a trade-off, you'll have the bare minimum of magical ability, but you won't need it for day-to-day life anyway. What do you think? Sounds good to me. Last but not least, she continued, how old do you want to be? Pick whatever age calls to you, whether it's 10 years old or 70. You won't want to be too old, I suppose, but it's all the same to me. I don't want to be a kid again. But that said, I did want enough time to enjoy my second life. I gave it some thought and landed on something in the middle. After I gave an answer, my consciousness slowly faded, and when I woke up, I was already in this forest. I stood up cautiously, expecting some dizziness, but I shouldn't have been worried. I looked down at my hands, but I couldn't tell whether I was now the age that I'd requested. Hands change slowly over time, I suppose. As I took a breath, a sharp pain lanced through my head. While your body is adjusting to the new environment, you may get a headache. That's proof that your new skills, knowledge, and memories are syncing up with your body, so don't worry. So this is what she meant. Did it have to hurt this much? She wasn't going to be giving me any particularly powerful skills anyway, I grumbled to myself. I'll prepare a place where you can live and work as a blacksmith, along with some provisions like food and ingredients. Or so she'd said, but looking around, there was nothing that stood out among the trees. Maybe it wasn't around here. While it was unlikely that she would have purposefully started me far away from my would-be home, it wasn't impossible. It'd be extremely irritating if that were the deal, though. In the worst-case scenario, the place could be so far away that I'd never find it. This clearing where I'd woken up would have been the perfect spot for a house, but it was currently empty, so I struck out to explore my surroundings. When I stepped into the forest proper, the fresh, woodsy scents hit me anew. The sunlight filtered through the trees. The sunlight filtered through the foliage, and it was pleasantly cool beneath the trees. The leaves rustled gently, along with the occasional chitter and patter above me. There must have been some small animals playing amongst the branches. The trees themselves were no different from those in my original world. Elegant and tall, each tree was a pillar that held up the sky with its crown. I touched one of the trunks. The rough bark felt the same as well. As far as I could tell, there weren't any dryads emerging from the woodwork either. I heard a scratching sound in the branches close by. Looking over, I saw a green squirrel-like creature pop up from amongst the leaves. I'd never heard of any squirrels with green fur back on Earth, so this creature must have been unique to this world. Seeing its appearance struck home the fact that I was in a new universe. I was so excited that I walked toward it without thinking. It shrunk back in fear, and I soon came to my senses. Even if it looked adorable, with its chubby cheeks and round eyes, it might be a dangerous animal. Maybe it was even venomous. I was in a completely unfamiliar environment, so I had to be on my guard. When my headache subsided, a great torrent... Excuse me, hand. When my headache subsided, a great torrent of knowledge flooded my mind. It was as if I'd just installed a new knowledge base. At least now I wouldn't be done in by my own ignorance. It would have been pathetic if I were to be decapitated for unwittingly insulting a noble, for example. However, even though the newly installed data had come with a general picture of this world, including information about the fauna, I didn't know any of the nitty-gritty details. What kind of habits did that green squirrel have? Was it venomous? Venomous? I wished I had someone to guide me. My stroll had yielded no great discoveries, so I turned back around and suddenly caught sight of something large back where I'd come from. What in the world? I muttered. They definitely hadn't been there when I first passed through. Or maybe it'd just been invisible, who knows? The large something turned out to be a small log cabin. I guess this was where I was supposed to live. The cabin looked safe enough, but I approached it with caution nonetheless. As I drew closer, I could instinctively perceive that there was no one inside. Maybe heightened senses were part of my resurrection package as well. I glanced through the window lattice, and the cabin looked empty inside. Just to be safe, I headed toward the door in a half-crouch, so I couldn't be seen from within. There was a simple pull handle and the keyhole on the door, but no knob. I tugged lightly on the handle and the door opened easily. It hadn't been locked. I peeked through the crack. There still weren't signs of anything living, and the air smelled clean. It seemed safe. I stood up from my lowered stance and swung the door open. A muffled clattering sound startled me, and I quickly crouched back down. Nothing unusual happened after a few beats, so I relaxed and straightened back up, glancing around me. The inside of the cabin looked like a ski lodge, except there was no second floor. Instead of a modern-style kitchen, there was a separate area with a dirt floor with a traditional Japanese charcoal stove stood, alongside a shelf for dishes and cutlery. There was a rope running through the kitchen, and beyond it was another door. Something on the other side of that threshold had probably created the sound I'd heard when I'd initially opened the door. I closed the front door. There was another round of clacking, and slid the latch closed. The room was large. There was more than enough space for the sizable table and several chairs. In the rafters, I could see something that looked like wooden clappers. The sound earlier had been muffled, so these couldn't have been the cause. Something else must have triggered it. My curiosity was piqued, but I let it go for now. In the corner of the room, there stood 3 more doors. The first one led to a bathroom. I reasoned that, since I'd yet to come across anywhere to sleep, one of the remaining 2 doors must open to a bedroom. However, the next door I tried revealed a study with a large desk and bookshelves. The last doorway ended up leading to the bedroom. It was sparsely furnished with a wide bed, a nightstand, a desk, and a small stool, which reminded me of the cheap, bare-bones rooms that businessmen booked before work trips. Now, on to the main attraction, the place where the magic, or smithing, happened. I was eager to see the equipment that had been prepared for me, but I also hoped it was practical. I wasn't going to take on apprentices. It was just going to be me for the foreseeable future, so even if there was a fancy charcoal blast furnace for smelting, I wouldn't be able to operate it alone. With my heart pounding both in excitement and in worry, I crossed the kitchen and opened the last door. Inside the room was everything you'd expect to be in a blacksmith's toolkit. There was a hammer and anvil, a small hearth for a crucible, and even a bloomery on a bed of charcoal for ironworking. I was equipped to make both Western and Japanese weapons from iron or steel, along with small items like arrowheads. Thanks to the data installed in my brain earlier, I now knew how to use all the equipment. That headache had been a worthy price to pay. A counter stood in the middle of the workshop, beyond which was a small open space. The door on the far wall was with an elaborate latch led back outside. I see. This space doubles as a storefront for customers, I mused aloud. The first set of rooms made up the living room space, whereas this side of the cabin was pure business. If I'd forgotten to latch the front door to the living space before coming to the workshop, the clappers would alert me to any customer that tried to enter that way. The rope I saw earlier was also connected to the door in the workshop that led outside, so I would be alerted the other way around too. It was a simple but effective rig. I took one last look around the workshop before returning to the living area. It didn't feel like home per se, but I couldn't return to my former world even if I wanted to. Besides, I didn't have any relatives or a girlfriend. The only person who would have been troubled by my death was my manager at work. But even at the company, I was easily replaceable, a cog in the machine, so maybe it didn't make a difference. Either way, there was no turning back now. I shook my head to clear my thoughts. My stomach gurgled loudly, begging for food. I know that the body can't lie, but couldn't have picked a better time. I sighed and went back into the kitchen to check on what food items had been stocked. If only there were microwavable meals. But I wouldn't count on it. The pantry contained vegetables, mostly potatoes and the like, and smoked meat, pork I thought, along with some legumes that looked like soybeans and lentils. A nearby jar was filled with cured meat, likely also pork. I'll try making a stew. I filled a small pitcher with water from the large water jar and poured it into the pot situated on the charcoal stove. I thought I'd have to manually build a fire with the charcoal and kindling, but I wanted to give magic a go. According to the installed data, there weren't any complex incantations for casting magic. Instead, I was meant to channel the motes of something or other, again, the data wasn't big on specific details, that danced in the air around me. As I concentrated, my fingertips went hot. It worked like an adiabatic compression system, similar to the ones used in diesel engines. I acted as the piston that compressed the gas in the cylinder. The temperature rose and rose, and then whoosh, the flames blazed up in front of me. The fire soon gave off a warm glow and flickered merrily. "Wow, I really did it," I said, touched by the proof of my accomplishment and the sensation of magic still burning on my fingertips. It was a completely novel experience for me after all. The watchdog had said that I wouldn't have much magical ability, but this was certainly plenty for everyday life. While the idea of starting a fire from raw materials was romantic, using magic had been much less effort than using flint or generating heat through friction. There was a limit to what I could do though. I couldn't sustain the heat over long periods of time, so I could only ignite things that were easy to burn. If lighting a fire was considered the bare minimum, maybe there was cold storage technology powered by cooling magic that existed in this world too. However, I hadn't seen anything like a fridge in the cabin. The vegetables I'd found were either dried or freshly harvested, and the meat was smoked or cured. I could have been wrong. Maybe cooling magic didn't exist. Or there was a possibility that these items were a luxury, so they wouldn't be found out here in the middle of nowhere. The water had come to a boil, so I added some dried cured pork, root vegetables, and soybeans. I kept the mixture on the heat while stirring it with a wooden ladle. As the stew bubbled away, I returned to my thoughts. I could earn money through smithing, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to sell my products right away. And without an immediate source of income, I'd have to figure out a way to get more provisions before mine ran out. I needed water, ingredients, and seasonings, of which salt was particularly important since it could also be used as a preservative. Before any of that, though, I needed to find out more about my surroundings. I didn't even know if I'd woken up in the morning or afternoon. There may have been geographical data that came with the installation process, but even if I had a map, I wouldn't know where to start looking. Where was this forest? How big was it? And what kind of place was it? Where was the nearest town? There were a whole slew of questions that needed answering if I was going to live here for several more decades. I also wanted to know how frequently people passed through this forest. Well, what I meant to say was, I wanted to know if this place was actually well traveled. The cabin was set up with the intention that customers would come here to shop. Of course, I had no idea when they would start coming, and it would look suspicious if I were to say that I'd been living alone in the forest this whole time. Especially if people passed frequently through these woods. How was I meant to explain the fact that this cabin had appeared out of the blue? I'd have to ask around if I'd ever made it into a town. My list of to-dos was growing long, though I suppose that was a natural consequence of moving to a new place. The food finished cooking, and it smelled like stew at least. I took out a wooden bowl and spoon from the shelf and dished some out. I took a sip. It tasted exactly what you'd expect a broth of cured pork, root vegetables, and soybeans to taste like. Completely ordinary. But it wasn't half bad. At any rate, my cooking was edible, so I could avoid a slow death by starvation. I had no problems with eating the same thing every day, at least for a while. Once I got sick of the taste, I'd figure something else out. The sun was still high in the sky even after my meal. By my guess, it was no later than mid-afternoon, but it was still hard to tell with all the trees surrounding the cabin. My body was also telling me that it wasn't going to get dark anytime soon. Since I felt alert and energetic, I decided to go out and explore again. I was wearing a shirt and pants made of hemp fabric and a leather vest, like the stereotypical garb of an RPG villager. Though I didn't expect to run into anyone given how isolated this cabin was, if I did, I'd fit right in with these clothes. I carried a hunting knife with me that I'd found in the cabin and then set off, locking the door behind me. I headed into the forest. Since there was plenty of sun... Since there was plenty of sun and the trees were spaced out, it was still sunny underneath the canopy. Even if it's light out now, I should still make sure to head back early, I said to myself as I carved an X into a nearby tree trunk to mark my path. The first order of business was finding water. I thought I could search for 2 or 3 hours before getting tired, and if I hadn't located any by then, I'd come back. The cabin receded quickly behind me, but from the implanted data, I still had a sense of where it was, unlike when I first woke up and couldn't navigate at all. It had taken some time for the downloaded info and experiences to sync up with my muscle memory. I assumed that it was probably going to be the same with blacksmithing. I had no previous experience from my former life, so I had to rely solely on the data that came with the installation to this new life. That data had to be read in as I smithed. I knew that the discrepancy between the knowledge base and my physical memory would disappear over time. In any case, I wasn't particularly worried. As I walked, new bits of info about the flora and fauna and sense memory were gradually coming to me. Even so, I was still marking the tree trunks as I went, on the off chance that my new knowledge would desert me in an inopportune time, leaving me stranded in the forest. I was also pocketing herbs that I came across that had medicinal effects, like fever reducers or antiseptics, since I hadn't found any of those in the cabin. Judging from the abundance of useful herbs here, this world was looking like a pretty good place to live. I'd been wandering for an hour or so when I finally found my precious water source. I heard the sound of running water and rushed toward it, emerging on the shores of a lake. Upstream, I could see the mouth of the river that fed into it. This lake was so wide that the opposite shore disappeared beyond the horizon. Since I'd been collecting herbs along the way, it'd taken an hour to find this water source. Excuse me. Since I'd been collecting herbs along the way, it'd taken an hour to find this water source, but it was actually only 15 minutes away from my cabin. This was the solution to my water problem. I might have to make multiple trips a day, but it would be a perfect exercise after being cooped up in the workshop for hours. I would incorporate it into my routine starting tomorrow. I peered at my reflection in the water. The ripples made it hard to tell, but my reflection looked 30 years old, as I'd requested. I'd figured that 20 would have been unbelievably young to be an accomplished blacksmith, which is what I'd asked to be, and what the data and experiences that came with the install now pointed to. No one would have believed in the abilities of someone so young, especially considering that I was a stranger to the area. My internal clock told me that there was still some time before sunset. I ambled along the shore, looking around at the forest and lake, and I made a couple of discoveries. First, there were shrubs growing fruits that looked like raspberries. In the boughs of the trees, there were apple lookalikes too. According to the data, they were both edible, so I picked one apple doppelganger from the tree. It certainly smelled like an apple. I tentatively took a bite. "This is so sour," I exclaimed. Though it had a trace of apple flavor, it was extremely acidic. It wasn't as sour as an apple vinegar, but it was a no-go for anyone who disliked sour food. What a frightening fruit. The farmers in my previous world worked hard to grow sweet, juicy apples, and their efforts had really borne fruit. Pun intended. In any case, I hadn't brought anything to carry the fruits in, and I still had some food stockpiled. I'd come back another day to gather some more. I turned away to look toward the lake again. The flowing water suggested that there may have been a mountain nearby. Perhaps it was the source of the river and the place where the water drained from, but I couldn't see anything from where I was standing. I spied some fish swimming in the crystal clear waters and vowed that next time I'd come with a rod and bait to try and catch some. Hopefully, I'd have time once I started working as a blacksmith. I'd be spending much of the day in the workshop, since smithing was going to be my livelihood. Well, I could always decide on fixed hours and then go fishing on my days off. I was done being a workaholic. I wanted to live a slow, quiet life. I puttered around for a while longer before my internal clock said it was getting late. It was time to go back, or so I decided when I suddenly saw movement in the grass. Looking closely, I saw a large animal around 150 centimeters long, almost the size of a human adult. I approached it cautiously. It was hidden in the shadows, so I couldn't see it clearly, but I noticed it had triangular ears like a cat or a dog. However, its silhouette looked almost human. Its shoulders heaved up and down, and I quickened my steps. It could definitely hear me approaching, but its breathing was ragged and it didn't move a muscle aside from its shoulders. Only when I came within touching distance did I realize what the animal was. Maybe it was rude to call it, her, an animal. She must have been one of the beast folk. She had a tiger-like tail and ears along with striped fur in her hands and feet, but she looked human otherwise. Light leather armor protected her torso. She was carrying a bow slung over her shoulder and a quiver down by her waist, but maybe she'd not had a chance to use them during her last tussle. Painful-looking wounds covered her body. She had collapsed face down, but I could see that her armor was torn at the sides, and the exposed skin was bruised and bloody. While the wound wasn't bleeding profusely, it was obviously severe. I didn't need the data to tell me that much. I'll have to get her somewhere safe as soon as possible. I turned her over and lifted her up. Her armor wasn't as secure as I thought because her surprisingly ample breasts spilled out over the top of the leather. I was shocked, but there was no time to stop and stare. I just filed the image away and hefted her body over my shoulder in a so-called fireman's carry. She was lighter than she looked. It'd be more chivalrous to carry her like a princess, but this is faster, I remarked. It'll have to do. Sorry. Carrying the half-tiger girl, I rushed back home. I'd walked a ways along the shore of the lake, so it took longer to get home than the 15 minutes I'd initially estimated. She was fading fast, but her body still contained warmth. I clung to the hope that I'd make it back in time. When we got back to the cabin, I had to set her down so that I could unlock the door. The muffled clatter from the workshop side reached my ears. I hurried to the bedroom, and after scrounging around, I found some extra sheets in the cupboard. I grabbed 2, returned to the living room, and put them on the table. Then I headed into the workshop, where I was able to find a needle, thread, and knife. The former 2 were for stitching together scabbards, and the latter was merchandise. But this wasn't the time to be picky. I had everything I needed. In the kitchen, I put the needle into a pot of water and lit the fire. While waiting, I sprayed one of the sheets over the table in the living room. The girl was still lying unconscious on her side where I left her. I carried her into the cabin and laid her down on the table, then latched the door so I wouldn't be disturbed by any visitors, though it wasn't likely anyway. I removed her bow, quiver, and wrist guards. They looked like archer's gloves, and set them aside. I also removed her armor. Well, it was really just a breastplate. Her shirt was wet and sticky with blood, so I cut it down the middle and took it off. First, I checked to make sure she had no serious wounds other than the one on her side. It was hard to tell if her hands and feet were injured because of the fur. Although, if I could have seen a wound even through the fur, it would have been a serious gash. I took the lack of visible trauma as a good sign. She had cuts and scrapes all over her body, but only the oozing opening in her side needed immediate attention. Fresh blood welled up at the site of injury. She didn't seem conscious, but her face had been screwed tight with pain this entire time. The water had come to a boil. I cut out a piece of the extra sheet and placed it in the water to disinfect. After a while, I took it out and brought it to the table, along with the needle and thread. The data really comes in handy at times like this, I said. So far, everything I'd done had been informed by some knowledge from my previous life, alongside the helpful data. However, for the next steps, I had no real-world experience, only the data could see me through. I wiped down the wound with the disinfected sheet. The young woman grunted and her face tightened with pain, but she was still unconscious. Blood was welling up again, so I had to stitch the wound quickly. And, since I didn't have any anesthetic, this was going to hurt her. Every time the needle passed through her skin, her jaw clenched. My chest tightened with guilt, but I had to keep going for her sake. At last, I was able to suture the wound closed. It was nowhere near as neat as a surgeon's stitching, but since my installation had come with some basic survival skills, it had come out alright. The job may have been ugly, but at least it would prevent the gash from getting worse. If she complained about its appearance later, I'd take it in stride and apologize. Again, I soaked the sheet I'd used to clean the wound and then used it to wipe down the rest of her body, double checking for any serious injuries. It was awkward to say the least because she was completely naked. Fortunately, both my mind and body understood the severity of the situation, and I finished without embarrassing myself. I extinguished the fire and filled a wooden bowl halfway with the hot water, then soaked some of the fever-relieving herbs I'd gathered earlier. After a while, the brew started to give off a crisp, minty scent. I fed the girl the medicine after making sure it was cool enough to drink. When I spooned the liquid into her mouth, she drank it down herself. It was lucky she wasn't completely unresponsive. The bowl was soon empty, and since the herb was a fever reducer, I hoped that it would have some pain-relieving effects as well. She didn't miraculously recover, but after an hour, her breathing evened out. I tried moving her because the table was no place for a patient. I carried her princess style, this time into the bedroom, and laid her down on the bed. Of course, I made sure to cover her with a kakibutan, or a blanket, I should say, to match with this world's Western-style culture. She was sleeping soundly. I hadn't noticed before now, but on her head, a stylish green hair ornament glittered in the light. I sighed deeply, feeling completely drained. The first aid itself had been exhausting, but more than that, maintaining that level of concentration had really done me in. Between scouting my surroundings earlier and rescuing the girl, it had been a long day. I decided that I should eat dinner, but I needed a break first, so I sat down on the stool by the nightstand. Tomorrow, I'll go replenish my water supply and then try my hand at smithing. I'll also need to check in on her once in a while, I said. Thinking had made me sleepy, and sitting down had only made my tiredness more pronounced. My head drooped, and I jerked it back up. This was a familiar feeling from my old world. I was starting to nod off. No, I have to make dinner, I mumbled, but it was no use. I slipped off into the welcoming darkness. I was stirred from sleep by a strange feeling around my neck. How long had I been unconscious? And how was the girl doing? I opened my eyes, still out of it, to the sight of her. She was hovering over me and gripping my throat with one hand. Well, I thought it might turn out this way, I said as calmly as I could manage. Her grasp was light, but it didn't escape me that she could have easily ended my life while I'd been asleep, and before I'd spent even a full day here. How are your injuries? I asked. She stared at me. Her eyes were a beautiful golden color, just like a tiger's. At first, she looked confused by my question, but she soon schooled her features into impassivity. They hurt, she responded, but they're healing. That's good, I said, smiling with genuine relief. My efforts to save her hadn't been in vain. Right, she said with trepidation. That was my chance to push her off and free myself. but I didn't want to risk upsetting her. She quickly recovered from her lapse. "Did you look?" she said, anger coloring her voice. She tightened her hold. "Only because I had to treat you, and I didn't touch you except for where it was medically necessary. I promise," I stated, making sure to keep my voice level. "Are you telling the truth? If I lied, you can wring my neck." She locked her gaze with mine. After a few seconds of intense eye contact, she sighed and released my neck. "I'll believe you for now." "Thank you." "Humans give off a distinct scent when they lie," she added. "You don't smell that way." "You can tell if I'm lying just by how I smell?" "Yeah, but only when humans are rattled. Canine and lupine beastfolk, on the other hand, can smell lies any time." I nodded. If I had felt her up while treating her and lied about it, she'd have seen through me and killed me on the spot. It was only my second day here and I was already on thin ice. I got up and rummaged through my belongings, pulled out a change of clothing and handed it to her. "Put these on for now," I instructed. "What about my clothes?" she asked. "I had to cut them off you to get to your wounds. Plus, they were soaked with blood. It's probably best to throw them out." "Oh, I see. I'm sorry if they were important to you." "No, not at all. Just scraps," she said before starting to change. She'd been naked up until now, but for what it was worth, I turned away to give her some privacy. For a space currently occupied by 2 people, it sure was quiet. The only sound was the rustle of the clothing. "Do you own this cabin?" "Yes," I said, turning to face her again since she'd finished changing. "What are you doing all the way out here?" "I'm a blacksmith." "Blacksmith?" she asked. "Well, I just moved in yesterday." I'd waffled on how to explain my living situation, but ultimately I decided to stick with the truth. There was a good chance that she knew this area, and I didn't want to make her suspicious by saying anything careless. "Was this cabin always here?" Bingo, she knew where we were. "It was here when I got here," I replied. That was true, except for the part where it appeared out of thin air. I'm not in this part of the Black Forest often, so I probably just missed it before. The Black Forest. I had seen this name in the geography data that had been installed in my mind. Though I was trying to keep a poker face, on the inside I was jumping for joy. I didn't want her super senses to detect anything. If I combined the data with what I'd seen while walking around yesterday, I could guess our location. Was it around here? Right now, we're in the eastern part of the forest, I hazarded. "Oh, I mostly roam and sleep in the north and west. I rarely come here." Whew. I didn't know our exact coordinates, but at least I got the general area correct. She continued her explanation. "As soon as I ventured this way, I ran into a black bear, and well, you can guess what happened. The only reason it didn't kill me was because it sensed you approaching, I think." "I see. Something vicious enough to take her down lived here?" "In this forest, she was likely considered a strong predator herself. Besides the fact that she was part tiger, she must have been strong since she wandered around the woods all by herself. However, she was injured just now. She was injured right now." I didn't want to turn her out, so I said, "I have a proposal for you." "What?" "Well, it'll take time for your injuries to heal, right?" "Yeah," she replied. "Beastfolk are sturdier than humans, but a wound this large will take some time to heal. I won't be able to hunt or gather food for 2 weeks." "Why don't you live here then?" I offered. "Huh?" "I don't mean anything strange by it. It's just mutually beneficial," I reasoned. "I'm new to the area, and I'll need some help with my smithing. You need to heal, and even after you're recovered, you'll still need some time to adjust, right?" "True. You'll be more comfortable here. At least, you won't have to worry about rain. I bet it's hard to hunt during a storm." "Makes sense," she said, and paused to think. As she considered my offer, her softly pointed ears swiveled in different directions, and I was mesmerized. I could look at her tiger features all day. I didn't say that to her, though. I figured she'd be outraged. Alright, I'll stay here until my injuries are healed and I can move normally again. When that time comes, I'll consider what I want to do long term. How's that? She asked. Works for me, I said. Cool. Let's get along then. Great. I'd said that I wanted to live with a cat, but never in my wildest dreams had I thought this was how my wish would be interpreted. I suppose a tiger girl counted. Watchdog, was this your answer to my request? I asked her in my head, but there was no response. Not that I'd expected one. By the way, what's your name? I asked. Samya. So her name was Samya. Nice name, I said, but she didn't respond. What's wrong? I finally asked. It's too cute. I'd rather be called something that sounds tough. Like Gonzalez? Pfft. The sound burst out of her. A second later, she was rolling on the bed, cracking up. Gonzalez, your naming sense is horrible. Stuff it. At least my parents gave me common sense, I said, disheartened by her jeering. She was laughing so hard that she was crying. In the 4 decades of my first life, my bad naming sense was the only weakness I hadn't gotten a chance to rid myself of. I should have had the watchdog fix it, but it was too late to be remembering that now. Even if you don't like your name, your family gave it to you, I said after Sammy recovered from her fit of laughter. Besides, I think it suits you. Oh, thanks, she replied. Back in Japan, there was a saying, the crying crow is already laughing. In this case, though, the laughing tiger is already bashful, would be more accurate. Basically, it meant that a person's moods are quick to change. Alright, I'm going to go refill our water supply. It's a ways from the cabin. Will you be okay by yourself? I asked. Before you go, she trailed off. What is it? You haven't told me your name yet. Oh, right. I'm Izotanya. Izo was my given name, though in my old life I'd introduced myself the other way around. It sounds Nordic. You have a family name and everything. If you say so. According to the geographic data, in this world, the region similar to Asia was in the north, not the east. The people who lived there were called the Nordic people. My bad, I didn't mean to pry. Family names are rare here. It's okay, don't worry about it, I said. I suppose you've already guessed why I'm setting up my workshop in an isolated place like this. In this world, it was rare for a man with a family name, in other words, a man from an established family line, to move to another region of the world and to work as a blacksmith in a remote forest, no less. It was unthinkable for someone of such status to choose the life of a recluse for themselves. Sammy had connected the dots and drawn her own conclusions about my background. Looks like you have it rough too, Samya said in camaraderie. I'm doing alright for myself. For now, at least. Can you help me out and only use my first name? No problem, Izo. Thanks, Samya. So, need a few more pages. There's like a there's a section break coming up, so I'm just gonna go to the end of the section break. I left Sammy to rest in bed so I could go fetch water. It was a vital commodity since it was the fountain of all life. I'd planned to go back to the lake with 2 empty medium-sized water jugs I'd found in the cabin. They hung from both ends of a shoulder pole and had ropes threaded into their mouths for easy carry. They looked pretty heavy, I mumbled, but this was a necessary task to pave the way for a slow life. I could have gotten Sammy to help me, but she'd be annoyed if she wasn't able to lift them. so I steeled myself and hefted the carrying pole onto my shoulders. Contrary to my expectations, the jugs were light. Not light as a feather per se, but about the same weight as a large plastic bucket from my old world. What kind of ceramic was these made of? Wait, that's not it. The jugs weren't light. I was just strong. Had the watchdog judged us to be the minimum amount of strength I'd need to survive in this world? Or maybe... I left that question for another time. Right now, I had to retrieve water, so I headed out to the lake. The trip took about 30 minutes from start to finish between travel time and filling the jugs. I'd be coming back every day from now on. The containers never became too heavy for me to carry, despite their volume. There was no doubt that I could lift more than before. When I returned to the cabin, I ate a breakfast of tofu and cured meat soup with Samya. Afterward, I ushered her back to the bedroom for rest and recovery, before turning to the workshop. There, I found the answer as to why I was now so strong. I thought about what I should try to smith first and settled on a small knife. A larger project would have taken more time, and my muscle memory needed the opportunity to sync up with the installed blacksmithing data and experiences. I figured I should start with a series of small items. But before that, I need a bit of magic, I said. I conjured fire to light the hearth, and the forge readily responded to the magic. The bed of charcoal started to smolder, and a deep and red light glowed from between pieces of coal. I knew that the forge would automatically circulate the flames I'd produced in order to maintain a stable temperature throughout the hearth, but I didn't know exactly how it worked. As expected of a magical item, I suppose. Thank God I didn't have to build the fire from scratch. With the forge going, I directed my magic toward the bellows. I pictured myself pumping power through my body and summoned a wind that blew out of my palms. It was such a momentary breeze, nothing so powerful as to blow a person away. Like the forge, the bellows took up the thread of my magic and started to work. It used my wind as fuel without needing any more manual intervention from me. I manipulated my magic and worked the forge and bellows to slowly raise the temperature of the fire hotter and hotter. I was planning to use the 4 centimeters wide by 1 centimeter thick iron bands from the raw material storage. I guessed that they'd been provided as freebies. I picked one up with the tongs and thrust it into the fire pot. I thought I was prepared, but it's really sweltering in here, I said to myself. At 800 degrees Celsius, the iron began to change color. It needed to be even hotter before it became malleable, though, so it was only natural that the air near the forge was scorching. I was dripping with sweat, so I removed my leather vest. However, I kept on the hemp shirt to protect myself from stray sparks. Using the bellows, I stoked the fire to raise the temperature even higher, hot enough to heat the iron. When the metal had reached the perfect temperature, I took it out and began to strike it with the hammer. At that moment, I realized just how much muscle you needed as a blacksmith. I get it now, I said with a grin on my face. Sparks leapt into the air from the force of my strikes as I shaped the iron. It was exactly like how it was depicted in the videos I used to watch in my previous life. What a thrill to experience it for myself. I was aiming for the shape of a Japanese sword, but I wouldn't try to make one quite as delicate. When the iron was roughly the correct shape, I left it to cool while I ate lunch. As Sammy and I ate, I asked her if there were any cities nearby. She told me there was one that was a quarter of a day's journey away, though she rarely left the forest herself. A round trip was technically doable in one day, but would be no walk in the park. After lunch, I forced Samya back into bed for more rest and returned to work. By the time I got back, the fire had died down and cooled significantly. I fed it more charcoal to raise the temperature again, which was something I still had to do manually. By now, I was at the tail end of the forging process. Japanese swordsmiths traditionally worked at night so they could pinpoint the exact temperature of the fire by its color. However, since my smithing skills were cheats, I could discern the temperature even when it was still bright outside. Once the blade had heated to the right temperature, I went to quench it in cold water to harden the metal. For my first time around, I wanted the edge and back of the blade to harden evenly, so I didn't coat any parts of it with clay like I would have for selective quenching. When I plunged the knife back into the water, a loud hiss filled the room. It was similar to the sound produced by a hot skillet being submerged in water, but several times louder. I could feel the knife cooling in my hand, and after a while, I lifted it back out. A light vapor coiled around the metal. For the finishing touch, I sharpened the blade on a whetstone. My workshop's inaugural item was now complete. I hadn't planned to use it for anything specific, so I hadn't made a hilt with a guard and I had left the grip untempered. I would have to wrap it with cord before using it, but the important thing was that I'd finished it. Now, I wanted to test the sharpness of the blade. Even though I didn't have a specific use for it, I still wanted to make sure that it cut through things. That was the whole point of a knife, after all. I grabbed a log as a makeshift counter and set a bundle of straw on top of it. I slashed the knife down toward it. The straw bundle split apart, along with the log. Huh? What the hell just happened? The knife I'd made as a test sliced all the way through a log? That was very hard to accept. It was my first knife. Sure, my skills came from a cheat, and admittedly, I'd put in extra effort for my first project, but even so, this outcome was hard to swallow. The knife seemed almost like a magical item. In fact, it was probably too sharp. It could really hurt someone. What if it wasn't my knife-making skills, but my knife-wielding skills that were top-notch? I had to experiment to find out. I retrieved the knife I'd used to cut Sanya's clothing yesterday and tested it on the same straw and log setup. That blade made a clean cut through the straw, but the log was undamaged. My new body did seem to possess some degree of swordsmanship, or should I say knifemanship, but this was proof that the knife I'd crafted really was of a different caliber. Back on Earth, we would call this situation using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. No one in their right mind was going to buy a knife that would slice through the cutting board along with their meat. However, the knife had potential as a weapon. Potential knives were only effective against an opponent without any armor. Most couldn't even cut through leather. My knife would have no problem against leather, though metal might be enough to stop it. Anyway, I hadn't been planning on to sell this knife. It had turned out better than I anticipated, but I'd made it as a trial product, and it was on the smaller side. I decided to keep it for self-defense. I made a scabbard for the knife out of the log I'd accidentally split. I cut 2 planks from the log, which were about the thickness of the knife and slightly larger in shape. I carved out the centers, glued the 2 sides together, and fitted a leather piece over the mouth. It was a simple sheath, but now I could carry the knife around with me. On to the next experiment. My goal was to test and see if everything I made would be this high quality. Please let the answer be no. I decided to make 3 knives slightly larger than the one I just finished, about the size of a survival knife. However, I would put in different amounts of effort. The first I'd make with the same effort as my other knife. On the second, I'd cut some corners. For the third, I'd slack off completely. I grabbed 3 sheets of metal, lit the furnace, and set to work. The 3 knives took me the rest of the day to shape. I opted to finish and test them in the morning. It was now time to wake Sammy up from her medically prescribed nap. "Hey, it's time for dinner," I said. "Get up." She moaned and turned over in bed. rustling the sheets. Her voice sounded somewhat erotic. Sleep is important, but so is food. You won't heal if you don't eat. Come on, wake up. I tore the covers off her and was treated to the sight of a completely naked Samya. So, she was the type to sleep without clothing. Whoops, I'd be more careful next time. She sat up groggily. When did it get so late? And why do I still feel so tired? I've literally been asleep all day. That's only natural after a serious injury. It's your body's survival mechanism to conserve energy and prevent excess movement while the body heals and replenishes the lost blood, I responded. Whoa, you're a walking encyclopedia. Nothing like that. It was just the combined knowledge I'd had from two separate worlds. The room had grown dark, so I picked up a lantern. It was my first time using it because yesterday I'd fallen asleep too early to need it. Luckily, it was a magical item too, so I could light it with my bottom of the barrel abilities. All I had to do was focus my energy. After a moment, the magic sparked out of me and into the lantern. Fire magic, along with wind magic, made up the extent of my primary magic abilities. You can do magic too? Sammy exclaimed. Only simple things, I said. The old families are something else, she said with awe. Even having the bare minimum in magic ability was rare. I wasn't sure how prolific magic was, but I knew that the large majority of people couldn't use it. We moved to the living room to eat dinner. I added some root vegetables to the leftover soup from breakfast and heated it up. Feeding an extra mouth cut into the food supply, but there was still quite a lot left. Of course, it wouldn't last more than a month or two. I'd have to figure out how to make money before the food ran out, either by selling my wares in the nearest city or offering repair services. Though, I didn't want to travel before Samuel was healed. I wouldn't be able to sleep if something happened to her while I was gone, especially since I'd already saved her life once. We made small talk as we ate. Both of us instinctively avoided discussing our pasts. She told me about her day-to-day life, and I reminisced about the scenery back on Earth. I used to be so moved when I saw the towering mountains with their everlasting snowy peaks. That kind of info wasn't going to give anything important away. After dinner, we parted ways for bed. I ended up sleeping at the desk in the study, but I was used to that for my programming job anyway. Samia had insisted that she should be the one to sleep in the study, but I put my foot down. She was still healing. End of discussion. She'd reluctantly retired to the bedroom, and thus my second day came to an end. So, that was, well actually, jeez, the first almost full 48 pages. But that was the beginning to my quiet blacksmith life in another world. So what do you guys think? Did you enjoy? So I hope you found some of these stories pretty interesting. If you like them, they all actually happen to be on jnovel.club. You know, or you could probably find them in other places and stuff too, so. But I do believe, yeah, JNovel is the one doing the translations and the publishing for the titles that I read today. So, with that all being said, and would you like that? I made it to 3 hours on the nose. However, it's getting about that time. Like I said, I hit the 3 hour mark. And I apparently need to go ahead and get to bed and get an early start tomorrow. But I want to thank you guys for coming out and hanging out with me tonight, listening to the bedtime stories. Hopefully you were entertained and or lulled into a nice, wonderful sleep. whatever applies. I hope you enjoyed your stay here. Again, thanks for joining me in the chill zone tonight. I will be back. Oh, wait, no, I forgot. I'm not going to be here on Saturday. There's no stream on Saturday. Not going to be around. So I will be back on Tuesday. So, got an event going on Saturday, so I will not be here for this time. But thanks so much. I appreciate you guys for hanging out. Again, hope you guys have a great rest of your day or your night, whichever, and I will see you soon.